So let me share my screen really quick. So this is a reading that I return to, or a little passage that I turn to quite often. It comes from the book Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. And this is actually by Richard Shaw, this passage I'm reading. It's in the introduction. So it reads, "There's no such thing as a neutral education process. Education either functions as an instrument that is used to facilitate the integration of the younger generation into the logic of the present system and bring about conformity to it, or it becomes the practice of freedom, the means by which men and women deal critically and creatively with reality and discover how to participate in the transformation of their world." So that latter part, right, that is the part we're going for. The practice of freedom, the means by which men and women deal critically and creatively with reality and discover how to participate in the transformation of their world. The DLP believes in this, that education should be foundational to creating the society we live in. So that's just a quick framework of that. So we hope today that it'll be a stepping stone towards that. And now I'd like to give kind of credit to the interns that we've been working with for the past few months. They've been an integral part to putting on this conference. They've offered invaluable advice and perspectives and a lot of logistical help behind the scenes. So Abby, you met her. Abby, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself again really quick.
Yes, hi everyone, my name is Abby Tamayo. I'm a fourth year sociology major. And I don't really have a fun fact, but I do love learning more about sociology and just educating myself further and educating others as well. I'll go ahead and pass it off to Spencer.
Hi everyone, I'm Spencer Jacobs. I'm a fifth year sociology and history major. I had a virtual background and it messed up, so I am actually returned. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm really passionate about education, and this was really a wonderful opportunity to work with Professor Che, Lauren, and all the other interns. And feel like I was actually making an impact on what I'd like to see in education. So now I'm going to pass it to Talia.
Hi everyone, my name is Talia. I'm currently a junior and I am a sociology and women's studies double major with a minor in Jewish studies. I'm currently working as a fifth grade Hebrew school teacher, and I'm very interested in pursuing education and learning about all of the ways that education can be improved. So I'm going to pass it on to Rose.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rose Deli Moreno, but I go by Rose. I'm a fourth year sociology major with an interest in both psychology and criminal justice. And this is my last semester here at San Diego State University. And my time here at San Diego State has piqued an interest in transformative education and has allowed me to be more open-minded. So I really hope you enjoy this conference, and with that I'll pass it on to Lauren.
Sorry. Thanks everyone for introducing yourselves. Yeah, these four have been amazing in helping me out this year. And then Professor Che, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. This is so exciting. And I'm not going to reiterate what everybody said, but as the president of the Dignified Learning Project, I want to welcome every single one of you, all my beautiful, beautiful current students who are in my Social 101, and many of my former students. And you know what? We're being joined today by people from all different parts of the world, and I really mean that. And we have our esteemed guests all the way from Denmark, Christine and Marcus, which makes this conference international officially, right? So I don't even know what time it is. I think, what is it? Is it in the evening time?
It's 7 p.m.
7 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining us. And again, I just want to reiterate all the work that our interns have done, especially, and of course, Lauren. And again, I just want to welcome everyone and let's enjoy this conference. I think I will learn quite a bit today and I'm really looking forward to it. Okay, and I'll see you folks throughout the entire day. So thank you, Lauren.
Thank you, Dr. Che. If you have any questions or concerns, feel free to message any one of us. And if you're interested in interning for a conference like this, go ahead and contact Dr. Che and he will get you connected. And I will now pass it on to Charlene to tell you all about the history of the Dignified Learning Project and the inception of the Praxis in Education Annual Conference. Go ahead, Charlene.
Hello, everybody. I'm Charlene. I am the executive director of the Dignified Learning Project. And so just to kind of give you a little bit of background, this conference is entitled the Praxis in Education Conference, right? And it started as a part of a both a student project as well as the nonprofit project, which in itself was also a student project. So going a little bit, kind of working currently and going backwards, so again, this conference is in relation to our annual Praxis in Education Conference, which started in 2018, 2017, 2018. What I had applied for a student success fee at San Diego State, which can be used for various student projects. I'm a current doctoral student through San Diego State and Claremont Graduate University, and I was awarded the fee and for the purpose of completing and putting on a conference. And so Indira Laughlin, who is no longer with us as a part of the Dignified Learner Project because she's moved on to go do other endeavors as well. She and I had organized the beginning portions of the conference, at which point Dr. Che introduced it to students, and a few students had kind of helped us, specifically Lauren, who was a huge role from the middle to the end and through the duration of it. And so one of the biggest reasons I wanted to do this, and Indira and I had kind of conceptualized this, was that students so often are left out of the conversation, right? Students of all backgrounds and ages and grades and areas are often left out of the conversation of, how to make change. And if they are included, it's often very surface level, right? Very shallow and surface level. And so for my perspective, it was an opportunity to start highlighting voices that often aren't welcome to the table to make these changes, because so often it's administrative, and then it kind of this top-down approach. And in general too, the idea of research, it's often very elitist and top-down as well too, correct? We see the ways that it's all about tenure track professors often are the ones who have most of the say with how important it is, and there's this kind of approach to research that is kind of housed in the ivory tower, right? We think about that way. And then going further, for me, one of the biggest struggles I had was, how can I, as somebody pursuing their PhD, not feel compelled to make a change when I know all of these problems are happening. And so Praxis, right, is from a Freirean notion, is the idea of critical reflection and action. And from my perspective, how can I do all of this research that is critical reflection and not be compelled to act? Hence the creation of the idea of our Praxis conferences is we can present all of these ideas which need to be, but how can we start making action? And at the core of the Dignified Learning Project, that is really our philosophy too, is action. So the Dignified Learning Project also started as a student project when I was in my master's program with Dr. Che. It was supposed to be just an independent study about research. It was a research in education. And as Dr. Che and I started talking more and more, I said, this has to be a thing. We have to turn this into something more. So Dr. Che and I co-founded that. That was a conversation in the fall of 2015. I did all the research on how to create a nonprofit. We filed at the end of 2016, and we were an official nonprofit as of Halloween 2016. And so we have since been trying to move forward and do various things. And one of our, kind of proudest moments is this of the conference. And when we started talking, the idea was that it really needs to be student-centered, right? We hear that all the time, student-centered, but I'm convinced that most education doesn't understand what student-centered or student-led education is. And so this year, I'm very, very happy and proud to announce that I had nothing to do with this conference for the most part. Aside from making maybe 2 links, I think that's about all I did. And I wrote a paragraph somewhere. Lauren and all of our students who organized this have been fantastic, and it is all of their work. And that's what we wanted. We wanted to be able to kind of say, hey, this is what we've done, and here, and we are very, very happy with with what we're seeing today. And I am so excited for how today is laying out. And I feel like it really embodies, truly embodies that idea of praxis. Just hearing, the things that everybody kind of felt that they were making an impact or that they learned a lot, that is inspiring in itself. And so it's exciting to know that at least, at least if there's one thing that we feel that is happening, it's that concept of praxis. So that's huge for us. So if there are any questions for me at any point about the Dignified Learning Project, or even how to start a nonprofit, you can absolutely let us know. And I am going to wrap up what I have to say here, so that way we can move on to see and hear the wonderful research and ideas and ways to make change for education, because that's what we're here for.
Alrighty, thank you so much, Charlene. Charlene's Instagram for the Dignified Learning Project is right up there, so go ahead and give him a follow. And let's get to it. So I will send in the group chat the link one more time for the program today. For the sake of time, we're going to go right into presentations. Calvin Liew is here. He is a first-year graduate student in SDSU Sociology Department. His interests are social theory and philosophy, globalization, and cultural difference. Calvin's talk is titled "An Update from Your University, Our Insincerest Apologies." And I will go ahead and give the floor to Calvin.
Hi, everyone. This is an update from your university. And it may be from one of the millions of committees, but more likely it is from the Committee of Diversity and Inclusion or from the Committee of Student Affairs. Sorry, just a moment. We have so many scripts in this office. Yes, sorry, just a second. Beloved students, faculty, staff, our deepest condolences and apologies to the Black community, the Asian community, our adjunct professors, or any marginal social group who has been most recently portrayed in corporate media. Or perhaps we just feel like we haven't given our obligatory solidarity statement to in recent months. We know you are anxious. We know you are stressed. And we are with you. We care. Do you know how much we care? I don't think you know how much we care. Are you okay? Are you okay? We care. We hope you're okay. Do you know how much we care? I'm sorry, we really care. Okay. We care so much that we hired 4 administrators instead of 2 to address these issues, to comprise our new committee. In fact, they're all people of color as well. They'll also be hosting a dialogue this Friday, where they'll make sure that nothing meaningful is said about the social problems that we're concerned about. In fact, we also care so much that our university president will not be taking their annual merit raise. So we have some more resources to pull from. For our ethnic resource centers, for our adjunct faculty, we care. We stand in solidarity with all our students and all our communities of color, and everyone and against institutionalized racism, patriarchy, and any kind of system of oppression that has persisted for a very long time. Have you seen our psychological services most recent pamphlet on self-care? Yeah, good. You know, just as long as you don't talk about collective care, it's okay. I wish that this could be a joke. I really do. But I think that if this wasn't obvious already, it has become since the onset of the pandemic in the last year. It's almost like a kind of gravity or like a physical law of the university. You know, we see the murder of George Floyd, or we see anti-Asian hate, or we see some coverage about the exacerbation of economic and social disparity on corporate media, and the next morning from your university by 9 or 10 a.m., like a robotic, just like a robotic arm or a mechanical appendage, you know, you can always expect an email to this tone and with these words almost exactly sent out in your university inbox. To me, the universities and the institution's insincerest apologies as such really represent the dilemma of where we are in terms of social action and education. On the one hand, there's a recognition that there is a kind of coercive force, energy, a kind of institutional inertia that requires that people act within certain bounds. Otherwise, their livelihood is jeopardized. Otherwise, their job security is jeopardized. And of course, what's very significant is that these are real objective issues. There's a huge point of tension and contradiction where we see that the higher up in the hierarchy or in the bureaucracy of higher education, the more security you have to say more or to critique the system or to critique institutionalized racism or to critique whatever you point out to be the problem. more and more the institution with these vocabularies of diversity and inclusion, and these committees and these resource centers for Asian Americans or people of color. You see that they're creating spaces within the institution. And I think there's a huge tension here whether or not we can call that progress. I think some would say undoubtedly it is. We're being included. The formerly excluded, the formerly oppressed are now in. Yet I worry that if this is a kind of golden assimilation of any kind of potential opposition, any kind of subversive energy, such that it seems as soon as the university sends out its insincerest apologies, the problem has truly been addressed. All the solutions offered by the university to remain at a very individual or like a psychological level, right? Self-care, take care of yourself, or attend this dialogue, right? Attend the events that are hosted by this resource center. This idea of radicalism or real, genuine, transformative social change, not reformative, has become so gutted or eviscerated of any meaning that they even allow for spaces within the institution to hold such a dialogue, to hold such a discussion. They provide funding for it. They send out a university-wide email about it. Yet nothing is truly done. I know of a recent meeting where a program advisor, along with a student, hosted a meeting with a group of students who had concerns about one of their courses in their program, the trajectory of their education, and what that meant for what higher education meant overall. And something that the advisor kind of responded or said over and over again to the students was, okay, well, this person that you're expressing concerns with, I admit I'm uncomfortable. I don't know what to do. This is somebody who's going to be sitting on the board of voting for my promotion. And it makes me wonder. It makes me wonder for these bureaucrats or for these administrators who write these emails, who sit on these committees, if they actually want to make a difference, or if it just collapses back into, hey, I'm just doing what I can, and the best I can do without jeopardizing my own security within the structure is by offering my insincerest apologies. And I feel that we have to move beyond that. And we need to reject those insincere apologies over and over again. And I know that this can seem like an immature proposition. I know that this can seem like a proposition that only people in a position of privilege can offer. How can I say something different? How can I be sincere? How can I be even radical without actually putting my own security, my own living security, perhaps as an adjunct faculty, as a poor student, or as a woman of color, or otherwise? How could I do that? How is that possible? It seems like the university or the institution or any kind of system that we're opposing or critiquing always offers a way deeper in, but no way out. And because our social imagination is so confined, we feel as though the only way forward or the only kind of possible progress is deeper in. And I think that's why when we make suggestions that really don't attack, say, conservative perspectives directly, but even these popular liberal progressive perspectives, people begin to feel very, very uncomfortable. But I think that's exactly what we need. We need to be the cartographers of a new world. We need to be the cartographers. We need to map out something different, something that we haven't seen before. We don't want to just create more spaces within an already perverse, an already dehumanizing place. We need to reject those insincere apologies. Thank you.
Alrighty, thank you so much, Calvin. We will be having a Q&A after discussion, or Q&A discussion after all the presenters go, so please do not forget them. Thank you so much again, Calvin, for presenting. I know that I resonated with that because I get those university apologies as well. Next, we will have Cecilia Lerda from University of California, Santa Barbara. Cecilia is a senior at UCSB, majoring sociology and minoring in poverty, inequality, and social justice with a certificate in the science of resilience. She currently teaches a correspondence course at the Santa Barbara County Jail, focused on opportunities for women. Her presentation will be on deferred action for childhood arrival recipients. Her presentation title is Deferred Dreams, DACA Students' New Decade. And I will give the floor to Cecilia.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm going to turn my camera off because my Wi-Fi at my house is not the best. Good morning. Like I was just introduced, I am Cecilia Lerda, and I will be presenting on Deferred Dreams, DACA Students in a New Decade. I will start by giving a little bit of background information. So the DREAM Act was started in 2001. It was first introduced. It's a similar program to DACA, but it would have provided a pathway to
Hi, Cecilia. I think you froze.
just a program that would not allow for a pathway to legalization for these youth in the United States. These are just some of the requirements. They are so many more requirements, but they are required to be currently studying, graduated from high school, or have earned a certificate of completion or a GED. They could not have any criminal records. This would include any felonies or misdemeanors. This would also include DUIs. They had to be under the age of 31 years old as of June 15th, 2012. And all of these requirements continue to be listed. And this is only the first page for these students to even be considered for the program. So the program has changed time and time again through the administration, but it took a hard hit last year, especially during the Trump administration. In 2020, Donald Trump constantly attacked undocumented individuals, quote unquote undocumented, because what does that even mean? So he claimed that the DACA program is unconstitutional. And prior to the Trump administration, DACA recipients were actually able to renew every 2 years, but he claimed that DACA recipients, because supposedly they were bringing crime, had to renew every year. And this would include a fingerprinting process to make sure that they are not committing any crimes. Alongside this, he also changed the original fees of $495 every 2 years to $756 every year. And this is during a global pandemic. So people are already struggling to make ends meet. And now students in particular are having to come up with $750 every year, alongside all the other stressors going on within the entire world. As of June 18th, 2020, the Supreme Court ruled against the Trump administration and their attempts to end the DACA program. And this would have been a success, except for the Trump administration was still able to reject initial requests for DACA recipients and deny employment authorization documents in which and a lot of people were even denied after paying the $765. They were still denied during a global pandemic, which made it more difficult for them to even sustain their way of life. And DACA is often referred as being beneficial to the United States. I personally don't think we should be exploiting people and having them measure how they're contributing to society. Grace Chang, a professor at the University of California, Santa Barbara, in her research, one of her writings was actually used in order to defend DACA, but she stated that even the defense of DACA was fought on bad rhetoric and compromising rationale. Framing DACA youth as assets, capital, and investments was in explicit terms extending on this. This would serve merely as another tool to capture labor workforce of young educated workers. Not allowing DACA recipients to have a pathway to citizenship only meant that the DACA program in itself would allow a work permit and a deference from deportation for students who have been here since they were below the age of 16. And Michael Ruth, in his article for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, explains that DACA students represented a large part of the workforce. As of September 2017, face the stresses of their families and everyone else, friend groups being deported. Of course, now we're on to a new administration. And as of January 20th, 2021, President Biden issued in his administration's intention to preserve and fortify deferred action for childhood arrival. It's not really clear what the word fortify means for the future of DACA, but the Biden administration has committed to preserving DACA in its original form. These are just a few of the statements surrounding the way that DACA recipients have felt about changing times pertaining to the DACA program. One of the students in which I interviewed said they've suffered a lot of anxiety surrounding the 2020 election. I always felt I had to argue for people like me. Like somehow it was my responsibility to share with people how Trump has affected our lives, but without sharing that I'm directly affected. After the election, I realized how much it takes out of you. Another person I interviewed stated that they are always changing the program. Within the last 8 years, it's changed drastically. And students are just sitting there waiting to see what the Supreme Court's decision is going to be, alongside this was all happening during the midst of the COVID pandemic. They also said they know it's up to them to figure it out, not only for themselves, but for their siblings and their friends. And then this was a quote from a student that really resonated with me. They said that their renewal date was scheduled during finals week, and the USCIS office doesn't care if you have finals week. Their scheduled fingerprinting date was set 8 hours away from where they were living, and they ended up receiving a C in the class, even though they had had an A the entire quarter, because the professor could not work around the fingerprinting date, even though the student had all the paperwork to prove that that's exactly what they were doing. And that just really resonates with me, because I think these issues, especially during the pandemic, there's so much going on outside of these students' lives, not only students, but every single person. And like was just presented, they send out an email saying, oh, our regards, but what are they actually doing? If professors in these majors that claim to be progressive and understand students are dropping students' grades from an A to a C, even though they see the efforts that are put in by the students. And this is just like half the things. And this is only pertaining to DACA students. It's not even a presentation on all the money so that people can reapply, because oftentimes the largest reason why people don't apply is because they need to pay rent or they have other things that they need to do in that moment. The second source are scholarships and internships and other resources, because a lot of the times undocumented students cannot apply to the scholarships or internships that are provided by the university, and they really have to dig deep in finding them. So this is a source that kind of gathers them all up together and makes it easier to find. And then the last source is a source to learn more about DACA and how to apply it and how to renew. And that's my presentation. Thank you so much for listening.
Alrighty, thank you so much, Cecilia. Learning more about DACA, because I don't know much about it, but I know that a lot of students are affected by it, especially those who are international students. So now we are going to quickly take a 5-minute break. So everyone go ahead and grab a snack or use the restroom. We'll be back at 10:46.
I'm muted.
Alrighty, so we are slowly getting back. And I go ahead and start off with the next presentations. Next, we have David Estudiante and Shawn Matiossian from Claremont Graduate University. Shawn Matiossian's passion for higher education prompted him to pursue political science and education interfield PhD degree at Claremont Graduate University. Before his PhD journey, Shawn worked in a variety of high-profile Fortune 500 organizations as a talent acquisition and college partnerships leader, and when guest lecturing or speaking on panels, he was struck by the power of giving back and mentorship. David Estudiante is the Assistant Director of Student Engagement at Claremont Graduate University and is currently pursuing his Master's in Education with a concentration in Student Affairs and Higher Education. Prior to his time at CGU, David served in a management capacity in business industry and has 10 plus years of experience leading diverse teams with a strong commitment to customer service. Today, they will be presenting on mentorship at the graduate level, specifically for master's students, and proposed intervention to further enhance graduate student success. Their presentation title is Mentoring Outside the Classroom, Master's Student Success. And I'll go ahead and have you all take it away. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, Shawn.
All right, hello everyone. So when we talk about or look at master's students, there's this idea that there's a misconception that there's mentorship and they understand what mentorship is, and they being faculty, students, master's level, because they come out of their undergraduate experiences and they don't really know how to navigate the graduate school or navigate maybe a new campus. And so the idea that graduate and professional level scholars' needs are adequately met by academic programs and departments is a common misconception. And there's a presumption that students already understand the institutional climate and how to navigate the campus and campus climate or bureaucracy. There's a lot of moving parts, there's a lot of people, there's new experiences, and without mentorship, there is a lack of an overarching definition of what mentorship is, what the results will be, accountability, and the expectation of what a graduate student should encompass and be. Particularly, we focus on the master's student, but there is this expectation that the institution provides undergrad students experiences that will confer them to really get them to understand what mentorship is in a master's program or a doctoral program, which again is the reason why we've got issues, because it's not always the case.
All right, and it's important to note that when Shawn and I did some of this research and we actually interviewed some current master's students, we are from Claremont Graduate University and we're both students there. So just for some context, as we identify the issue and then a proposed intervention, Claremont Graduate University, or CGU, is an all graduate institution, which makes it very unique. It's a consortium of colleges. So there are 5 undergraduate institutions and 2 graduate institutions, CGU being one of those, located about 35 miles outside of LA. We have almost 2,000 students with our fall 2020 cohort, 806 in pursuit of a master's degree, and almost 1,200 in pursuit of a PhD. We pride ourselves on being an intimate learning environment, meaning that typically classes are 12 to 15 students to faculty ratio. And one of the things that we found when we interviewed students is that intimate classroom environment lends itself to be considered mentorship, because you're getting this individualized one-on-one time with faculty members during the classroom. It's not actually mentorship and not at the level in which is needed. And we focused on master's students because of the time to degree. Typically, master's students are 2 to 3 years, and the national average for PhD or doctoral students is 8 to 10 years. So they have less of a time to actually acclimate to the campus, utilize resources, gain valuable time with faculty members before they're already out and transitioning into either the workforce or looking at PhD programs themselves.
And I guess given master's students that their experiences, they have a less of an opportunity to benefit from a campus environment. And the mentorship we propose really talk and encompass partnerships with the Office of Student Engagement, partnerships and programs that are either co-curricular, extracurricular. We also look at new student orientation as a component to this, but the nature of doctoral work really requires a strong advisor-advisee relationship. And in comparison, master's students don't necessarily get the same mentorship as a doctoral student would. We also found that master's students really should foster a sense of agency through workshops and help them navigating the campus climate and landscape. I think a lot of times we find that master's students are looking to define their voice, define their career aspirations, their reasoning of why they're at that specific institution. And so hopefully, you know, with the research that we find is that, you know, workshops can begin to really lead students into the right path before their semester. So there's a proposed idea that maybe a new student orientation during the summer that is built into a workshop that can be, you know, really built in right at the point, right at the forefront of their experiences. So they get a summer experience to really get that agency, that community, and really cross collaborate as they go through their different developmental stages in their graduate career, whether that's fresh undergrad, whether that's a career changer, whether that's a retiree, whether that's someone who's just doing this for a personal pursuit. And then we look at some of the theoretical frameworks of this. So one big one that David and I have looked at and explored is Chickering's psychosocial theory of development. And really what it encompasses is 7 vectors of development. And some of the influences that come from it is based on environment. So that could be the institution, their objective, the size, the student body ratio to faculty, the relationships, some of the curriculum that is taught, the friendship, and student communities. And community is really important as we go through, because we'll find also that student development programs and services really help the community. And then we look at intersectionality. And, you know, some may think, well, what is intersectionality? And it's really it's one individual having multiple identities. And, you know, it should be really considered in interventions and processes as we, whether as practitioners or faculty, look at a student's experience, particularly with masters, as we bring them to campus, and even, you know, post-COVID, as we bring them back to campuses, is identify what those identities are and how we can consider our interventions based on students' intersectionalities. And that could just be a varying amount of things, you know, simple things as like where they're from, their background, and it kind of goes deeper into the spectrum as we learn about human behavior.
Yep. All right. So in developing this intervention, it's really important that we start with our proposed outcomes, because you don't want to develop an intervention without thinking what you hope to gain through the process. And these outcomes had to align with the theoretical frameworks that really guided us in our pursuits when talking about mentorship, discrepancies of mentorship at the master's level. So the first was the development of mature interpersonal relationships. We wanted them to really establish peer-to-peer connections, also look at faculty on campus and start to identify who they'd like to work with. You may be paired with an advisor at the onset of your journey, but it doesn't mean that that has to be the only advisor you get or the only mentorship that you can receive. We also wanted some autonomy towards interdependence. And we wanted them to be able to understand the resources at their disposal and then have an ability to navigate to those resources when they need it, and kind of start to break down the stigma that you only go to those if you're struggling. That's not true. They're really there to help you build your skills. And then develop agency. We wanted there to be a more clear sense of direction and purpose through the graduate journey. It's not just about academics and progressing through coursework. You should be maturing at all different phases and levels, professionally, presenting at conferences, attempting to publish. All of that can still happen at this master's level. So that led us to a programmatic intervention. And what we proposed was a 3 workshop series that really did work on mentorship and incorporated those frameworks, specifically intersectionality. So these would be able to be housed either in person in a virtual space or even hybrid. So that's one thing we did consider given where we were with COVID-19. But the first would be what is mentorship and how is it meaningful? And this would really allow students to reflect on their journey thus far. And we thought that reflection piece is really key, because in the reflection is when you can really highlight the intersectional identities that each of these individuals bring with them to this new campus environment, because they can reflect on what levels of mentorship they've received, what kind of mentorship they're looking for, and it relates to who they are in the moment and where they want to go. And then second was leaning on peers, the role of networking and mentorship. And this is really important for them to understand that the graduate journey is really dependent on your peer-to-peer connection. The connection you make with the scholars throughout your program is really going to launch you later on. Shawn and I met our first class, and here we are today. So it's a testament to the more you build that network and you bridge the gap, the better you are in the long run. And then finally, mentoring beyond the classroom, understanding the advisor-advisee relationship and developing professional skills. This would be two parts. The first part would bring in faculty members and diverse faculty members to talk about what sort of mentorship they received and what they suggest to students. I think we hear a lot that many times they're willing to say you don't have to stick with your advisor, or you can build in different levels of mentorship depending on what you're looking for. And then the second half would really lean on our Center for Writing and Rhetoric and bring the director in to talk about conference presentations and publications. I don't think that we can get ahead of that enough. I think master's students, year one's done, and year two, they're just thinking about graduation. So the sooner we can get as a scholar, because at the graduate level, that's what we should be. We are now considered scholars, and building our scholarship, the better off we'll be in the long run.
So then the question is evaluation data metrics. So with everything being said, the way we would evaluate some of this information or data is we would evaluate, what post events. So whether it's a new student orientation, whether it's a workshop, whether it's a community building a workshop, we would pull together live feedback directly from those who attended. And our proposition is that we would use a Qualtrics survey at the conclusion of each session to really garner some data on how to develop the advisor-advisee relationship with a student. Really looking at who is looking for academic and professional mentorship. We would be able to identify a lot of the peer networks, and then we would really find their ability to navigate campus resources regarding mentorship. So what will that look like? Is it just a counselor and a student relationship? Is it a community? What is it? And with all this data that we find, we can incorporate questions regarding mentorship and the peer socialization in the first term, hopefully before they start, but ideally by the first term, and really create a first year experience committee that is dedicated to really shaping a student's lens and framework as they go through coursework from the beginning to completion of their respective degrees.
All right, that's what we have.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, both of you. Now we will go ahead and go into, just give me 1 second so I can remove the spotlight. Alrighty, so we have our last presenter, Sara Ajami. Sara is an interdisciplinary studies major studying sociology, psychology, and art with a minor in humanities at San Diego State University. Sara is an artist who uses the medium of painting to showcase her understanding of social world problems. Today, she'll be presenting her painting on what collateral damage really looks like. And also, Sara also did the artwork for our flyer, for our Zoom background, for all of it. She painted this eye. She's very talented, and I will go ahead and pass it on to Sara.
Thank you so much. 1 second, let me share my screen real quick. Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here. So without lingering it more, I'm just gonna dive right in. So I take the majors that I have, psychology and sociology, and show my understanding of them through my paintings. In this painting in particular, I'm diving in the concept of theme of play, using the word play in a contradictory setting. Here we have, this is actually the playground that I grew up on. So I took that setting and contradicted it with the collateral damage that play at the pawn of powerful hands, which in this case are innocent children in regards to man-made wars. Of course, other people suffer, but for the focus of my painting, I focused on children. So I've placed them, these children have nothing in common except the fact that the wars that they suffer through are through indirect and direct US interventions. So I've placed them in a purple box, purple symbolizing power and dominance, with a hole to the side of the box that can be interpreted in any way that you like. It's all depending on the audience's point of view. There's a coal institutionalized light source in a way that I wanted this to feel like a still life, like as if you're walking past it in a museum, kind of like a snapshot of history that is still ongoing today. And the pictures that I referenced here are, you might have seen them before because they made news headlines, and they're 100 most moving photos of all time throughout history. So I'm just going to give a brief summary of each individual child, their story and their background, so you can see what I'm alluding to. Okay, so the first one is Phan Thi Kim Phu. This was during the Vietnam War, and as we all know, there was US direct intervention in that war. She was 9 years old when US Army mistakenly dropped loads of napalm on their civil village, which burned her skin and gave her third-degree burns. You might have seen the middle photo in history books. It's actually a bigger photo, and it's her and a couple of children running towards the cameraman with US soldiers behind them. And it kind of encapsulates the entirety of the Vietnam War. Down here we have Samar Hassan. This picture was taken in 2005. She was 5 years old, and this is involving the Iraq War with direct US intervention. Her story is that her family was driving back from the city of Talafar, where US soldiers opened fire on them and shot her parents in front of her in the car, only because they suspected that they may have been suicide bombers. Of course, they weren't, and this picture was taken by a journalist minutes after she was orphaned. Top left corner is Alan Kurdi. This picture was taken in 2015, and you might have seen it in the news headlines. It was one of the most popular stories of that year. He was a Syrian refugee, only 3 years old, that escaped the war with his family, and they all drowned and were found on the coastal town of Bodrum. The US had provided air support and weapons to SDF against the IS militant in northern Syria. And as we know, US has a very grotesque history with Syria involving war and bombing. Leading to the second photo, Omran Daknish, following a year only after Alan Kurdi. He's also a Syrian refugee. He survived being bombed in Aleppo, Syria, and this picture is actually a snapshot of a video that went viral where they take him from the building that he was in, and they place him inside the ambulance, and he's showing no emotion. He's not crying, he's not hysterical at all, and he's just completely traumatized, and he's just staring at the cameraman. The last photo is about Yemen. I couldn't exactly find who this child is, like his descriptions. It's only that he's under 5 years old. The ongoing crisis in Yemen is still going on today, and I made this painting about a year ago. At that time, 85,000 children had already died or may have died soon of hunger and disease in Yemen. But as I updated my research, it has gone up to 3.5 million may also slip into pre-famine stage, malnutrition, and maybe prone to disease, which is still ongoing today. And this is due to the civil war since 2015 between the Yemeni government and the Houthi. US indirect intervention by supporting Saudi, which is placing sanctions and supporting the Yemen government, as opposed to Houthis that are supported by Iran. So just given the description of these, if I can just go back, given the description of these children, the whole point was that, in my opinion, when we live in America, we've never experienced war on our land. So we kind of undermine or don't completely understand the implications of war and how it's going on today. When we hear, like when we look at the news, when we hear, oh, 3,000 people have died, or the bombing killed 5,000 individuals, it's just a number to us. It doesn't really strike us as, oh, these were 5,000 families, parents, mothers, children, especially children, because they suffer the most from these. That's the contradiction of the play, because they're supposed to be playing, they're not supposed to be fearing for their lives, which is why this setting may seem uncomfortable to the audience, where we might feel a sense of guilt, even though we may not have participated in these events. But this is a critique of the systematic way, the systemic machine that has made war into a business, that has made it into a profit machine, in a sense, that has commodified human lives, that has dehumanized everything. So we have placed ourselves away, or those in power have placed themselves away from the casualties of war as sort of like a business model. So they can come up with slogans saying that sacrifices must be made for the greater good, or that protecting the American dream, protecting our freedom, fighting for our freedom in other countries that may not logistically make sense. How are you fighting for our freedom in other countries, bombing them, bombing civilians? They say that all of this has a cost, that all of these have collateral damage. So my hope was that through this painting, next time you hear anyone, a person in power or just in discussion, talk about collateral damage, that this image pops into your head, because this is exactly what collateral damage looks like. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was really good. Yes, claps for Sarah. Yes. So we are going to go into Q&A now. So if you have any questions for Sarah, for David, for Shawn, for Cecilia, and for Calvin, now is the time to ask. And I'll go ahead and if you want to ask a question, go ahead and raise your digital hand, or you could even put it in the chat box for any questions or concerns. I do have a question for Sarah. How long have you been doing your artwork?
Well, I've been painting on the side by myself since like high school, but taking it to a step further, like involving sociological and psychological subject matter, I would say probably since I took Dr. Che's class, which was about 2 years ago. So yeah, these paintings that I'm proud of, or yeah, I started about 2 years ago.
Thank you.
I have a question for Shawn and David, actually. Great presentations from all of you, by the way. Thank you very much. So David and Shawn, I have a question about kind of power dynamics and mentorship. From my own personal experience and my peers, I think fostering that interpersonal relationship with whether it be faculty members or administration can be quite tough sometimes. You know, just in the name mentorship, right? There's a asserted hierarchy there. And, you know, I just have been working with a friend who is really struggling with their graduate program right now and getting through like something like the thesis process because the person feels as if they cannot approach their faculty members. So what would you suggest for issues like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first thing I would say is this intervention is just the springboard to at least empower students. I think when we talk about power dynamics, what we have to realize is we want to empower individuals to realize that they have a voice in their own graduate journey. And I think by partnering with these certain campus initiatives and resource offices, that they'll feel a little bit more empowered at the onset of the journey so that they can approach difficult conversations like that. You know, I do work in higher ed there in the Office of Student Engagement, and we put on a ton of first-year programs and first-year events. And some of them are like receiving feedback or how to have difficult conversations so that students understand how they can approach the topic. We just hosted something where we brought in all the deans to discuss the advisor-advisee relationship. And one of the great things about that conversation is that even the deans of these schools told first-year students was, if you don't feel like you're being served by your advisor, it is okay to find a new one. And if they need help doing that, they can even go to their dean, or they can approach other individuals. If they're in a class with a professor and they feel more connected to them, there are processes on campuses to fill out forms, to change your advisor, and have someone that better suits your needs. So I think, yes, it's hard for people to do that because there is a power dynamic. You don't want, consequences for bringing up something, pointing out that something is flawed. But if you can learn how to navigate the campus environment, understand that there are things in place for you to be successful and feel empowered, then you may be able to actually engage in that conversation down the line.
Thanks. And I think that's great that there's stuff on the student side. In your work, is there anything on kind of the educator sides on fostering kind of a culture of opening mentorship, so that those kind of conversations that may be difficult will be perhaps, more welcoming with that faculty member?
Yeah, I would say, unfortunately, we rely a lot on faculty of color and our diverse faculty members to come in to talk with students, and we do that often. At CGU specifically, we have a Thrive Graduate Scholars of Color program that really allows students to understand and connect with different faculty on campus and talk about their experience approaching advisors back in their journey and when they had advisors that didn't suit their needs. But bridging the academic side is always tough, and it continues to be tough. And I don't think that we're making the progress we would hope to in all those spaces. So I don't know if I have the best answer to that question.
Thank you. I think Lace actually would want to chime in with that. I see in the comment section. Lace, did you want to chime in on that?
I just unmuted. Can I be heard? Yes. Can I be heard?
Yes, you're heard now.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's one of the things, and I have actually been listening to this wonderful presentations. I'm so excited, and actually have been incorporating some of these and amending what my remarks are going to be later on. But I wanted to talk about this right now. One of the best ways I think that I have found to talk about power dynamic and coaching and mentoring relationships, which is what we're talking about here, is to name it, to make the covert overt. Yes, we are using an inherently exploitive and racist and classist tool in order to subvert it. The power dynamic is real. It is upon us as mentors and supervisors and advisors to keep the structure as flat and round as possible. That does not undermine your authority. That does not necessarily have to undermine the relationship. In fact, it can enhance the relationship. It becomes more of a collaborative process, and we're externalizing the toxic power dynamic that is inherent. The toxic dynamic is what we are responding to, but the relationship between mentor and mentee, advisor and advisee, no longer needs to be adversarial. I would also like to say one other thing about, I have a mentor or an advisor or a supervisor that I don't like. My first answer, if someone were coming to me with that, would be, good, I'm glad you do. Because you're going to have supervisors and mentors and advisors and employers that you don't like. But one of the tools, one of the things that is also necessary to learn is how to manage up, how to deal with problematic people. If it gets to the point where it's just so toxic that it cannot be mitigated, that's one thing. But if the advisor is making you uncomfortable, that is not necessarily a bad thing. If the advisor is stretching you, that is not necessarily a bad thing. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Great, thanks, Lace.
So we do have a question, Alvin. How would you like the university to support, respond to the emotional needs of students following traumatic events?
Thanks for the question, Liew. I admit that maybe my answer, or even obviously my presentation, but perhaps even my answer to this question might come off as a bit vulgar. but frankly, I feel like we were just talking about some ways that we can better navigate the institution and offer support within it. I feel like a real response to the situation would come not within, but without the university, or as opposed to it. This might seem like a far off connection, but some of you may know Professor Sam. I was speaking with him recently, and he's read a lot of Elie Wiesel. That might be an author that some of you recognize, Holocaust survivor. He wrote Night. And Professor Sam remarked to me that one thing that came in, that one thing that was very common across all of Wiesel's novels or writing of the Nazis was that at the trials following, all the people that they knew personally talked about, oh, there's, Reinhard Heydrich, who was the third in command of the SS. He's a phenomenal father, great family man, very nice friend. Other people who were very high up in the SS, people who were involved in certain in the kind of, again, the very disgusting actions committed and the atrocities that occurred. And another really common thing that came up throughout all of that was that these people slept very well. They slept very well. And I guess with respect to connecting this to the previous discussion with regard to mentors and discomfort, I worry that the mentors who do make you comfortable, or many of, not all, but many of mentors who, even the mentors that do make you comfortable, are just, again, have compromised something, or are using this idea of strategizing or being smart about resistance as a kind of cover up for not really coming up with something different or otherwise. So I think that that's the kind of response that you're going to see within the university. There's individuals you might come across who have more adverse suggestions, but otherwise I don't think that the university alone can come up with such a huge solution. And I think that it has to come from the community. It has to come from students speaking with one another. It has to come from students talking about their problems collectively and not as individual or self-care issues. And I think only then we might be able to see something a little more substantial and less individualistic.
Thank you, Calvin, for your response. This one's for Cecilia. You mentioned in your bio that you currently teach a correspondence course at the Santa Barbara County Jail focused on opportunities for women. And I was just piqued by I was interested in that and like how you go about that and just your experience with that.
Yeah, so I actually started this prior to the pandemic. I worked with a boys camp, so it was youth who are incarcerated. A lot of them don't speak English. They don't necessarily have families, and it's more so just like a holding location because the state just doesn't know what to do with them. A lot of them were foster youth and so on and so forth. And then while I was working at the boys camp, I realized that the larger population in Santa Barbara County of people who are incarcerated are actually women. And we had all of these courses geared towards the men in the county jail where they could take a course on like how to transition. And I was like, there's not anything right now for the women. So we got together with, I work for Freedom for Youth. It's all volunteer, but they are absolutely amazing. And they do anything from lobby like new policies to in-person connections with people. And really what I came to realize is people who are deemed like not smart, or all of these things that were assigned to these people. I have never worked with more inspiring, like just amazing people. And it's just because the state just told them like, oh, you cannot sit in a classroom in a chair for 6 hours a day, so therefore you were just not smart enough. And so we kind of created a program with like 6 other students where we all did like 1 week courses. And so now we are teaching at the county jail, and we completely reinvented education, because I'm like, I would rather read a poem than sit there and read something that's just not enjoyable, that was a reading from like 50 years ago that doesn't apply. And so we kind of gave them creative outlets, so they can either write poetry for their assignments or use art to convey the ways that they're feeling. And especially with the women, so it is a transitional course. And the transitional course means they're either going, so it's a county jail, so they're either going to transition into prison, or they're going to transition back out of county jail. And this is just having set guidelines for themselves. So it is a transitional course. So they get to say, these are my goals, and have kind of a team of support while they're on the inside, while also we will continue to support them once they're out. And so the center, Freedom for Youth, also has a center, and once people are out, they can continue to visit the center. And so it's just a course where they can really set aside like what their goals are, and have a support team who they can say like, this is kind of who's here for me. And I thought, I graded a few of their assignments yesterday, and I asked them like, what are some fixed traits that you feel like you had? And one of the women said that one of her fixed traits is being in a gang. And that really just like opened my eyes to being like, she genuinely feels like this is a fixed trait. And especially in Santa Barbara County, is we have our college town, and right outside of our college town, no one realizes what is actually going on. People would argue that we don't have gangs, we don't have poverty, like these things don't exist, but it's because we're in this college bubble. So I think just taking the time to like step outside of the college environment has been like amazing. But yeah, that's just a little bit about that.
Yes.
Thanks for the question.
Yeah, of course. I was just, the whole creative outlet part was really meaningful, because I know that, you know, you want to do things that are enjoyable. So the poetry, and that's really cool that you have the opportunity to interact with folks and be inspired, inspire others as well. Is there any more questions?
I think there was a question from Leah. I'm sorry, I'm not sure which way you pronounce your name, but for Shawn and David, asking how would you suggest shifting your mentorship model to the undergraduate level? Do you think that is possible when there's a very large student body?
I'll take this one. Hi, thanks for the question. You know, I think about this often. Had a very unique undergraduate and graduate experience. One being that I went to an institution that had 75,000 undergraduate students, and then I went to one that had 20,000 undergraduate students. So I'm still very large. And now I'm at CGU, where the population, I believe, is, and David can correct me here, is maybe 3,500 total. Maybe less, maybe more, but the model that we focus on particularly is only geared towards master's students. So we're idealizing here that it's a smaller population to deal with from the forefront, but research suggests that for undergraduates, you know, the model probably would still work, but I think with an added practical proposition on career-related support. We've done some actually research in some of our research classes on how intersectional, you know, intersectionality can really play a part in, you know, career options, can workplace ideologies, what you want to do as a profession. I think there's been this norm, this weird norm in society that, you know, there's been a gender norm with roles and degrees and jobs, which we obviously is not the case. And so I think with a mentor and mentees, having a strong relationship that is more practical based in undergrad, such as like opportunities for networking, resume development, job interviewing skills, even, you know, like Toastmasters on presentation, us on top of the institutional mentorship, which could be, you know, your advisor-advisee relationship, which again, at an institution that serves a large population of 50,000, 40,000, you're not going to get that individualized experience. So I think there needs to be some original concepts built in that will allow the social construct of the institution and the population as a whole to work together, because peer-to-peer network and mentorship really does serve itself. Again, as David mentioned, like, he and I met in our first last semester, and that was a peer relationship that really served personally, academically, scholarly. And I think if institutions can really garner that and host that for undergrads, I think that will serve a very, very deeper purpose, and really help self-efficacy for students, but also build community within the institution. Because a lot of times you find that in these institutions, they're big, but the community may not be as core and tight as they say it is, because there's so many people, but no one actually really connects. So social peer networks is definitely one that I would advocate for.
Yes, thank you for that, Shawn. Next question is from Talia. Cecilia, can you talk a little bit more about what DACA looks like today? I know you mentioned that it went back to Obama model, but what kinds of requirements does that include in order to apply/qualify? And then Spencer also added, has the Biden administration taken any concrete steps to fortify DACA thus far?
So basically, right now, as soon as Biden and his administration came into office, they undid everything that the Donald Trump administration had done. So it's back to its 100% original form of when the Obama administration had first put it in place. And this is all the same requirements, except for, so basically during Trump administration, you had 18-year-olds who qualified for DACA, and then their younger sibling, who was a year and a half younger, just didn't qualify because there was no new applicants. So now we're back to having new applicants. So as soon as a student reaches 16 years of age, they can apply as long as they qualify with all of the qualifications that were listed during the Obama administration. So all of those are the same. And the following question is the fortify. Like I said in my presentation, we really have no idea what that's going to look like. And they are trying to push for a pathway to citizenship, but thus far there haven't really been anything that has been pushed. And basically DACA recipients, their only way to become a citizen currently is through marriage, or the other way, which is really sad, is to be sexually or physically assaulted by a US citizen. So those are the only two ways that a DACA recipient can become a citizen. And they're trying to push, the fortifying is a legal pathway. So that would allow DACA recipients to eventually become citizens. But there is a lot of pushback on the conservative side, because that would mean that if DACA recipients become citizens, they could potentially ask for their family members to also become citizens.
I think you froze, Cecilia, for that last part.
Yes. Just after the part where you said family and relatives can be citizens, or something along those lines.
Sorry, my internet is a little bit bad, but yeah, so the reason why the Conservative Party is really pushing against, they're trying to have the DREAM Act, which would allow DACA recipients to have a pathway. But with allowing DACA recipients to have a pathway, that would also guarantee that all the family members, well, primarily the two parents, would be able to become citizens, but then the parents could ask for their younger children to also become citizens. So there's just a lot of things that the conservative side tends to push back on, but also the Biden administration, there are still children in cages. So there's so much more that needs to happen that isn't necessarily happening with the hopes. I mean, we were able to somewhat undo what the Donald Trump administration had done, and now younger DACA recipients are able to pursue higher education, but there's still so much more we have to do.
Gotcha. Alrighty, thank you. So it is 11:30, so that is it for our Q&A. I'm going to go over our program really quickly to see what is left. So far we have done student presentations. So we're going to take a 15-minute break. We'll be back at 11:45. From 11:45 to 12:40, Lace Watkins, one of our guests, is going to be able to present, as well as Charlene will present. After that, we'll have a community lunch hour. That is up to you if you want to engage in conversation. And this is also an open space for people, for students to talk about their experience with the pandemic as well. So you can either step away or you can, talk and listen in on people just sharing their perspectives. And then at 1:45 to 3 p.m., we have the Martin Luther King Jr., The Purpose of Education, the centerpiece, and just a community dialogue and analyzing and deconstructing and finding what it means to us. So I will see you all back at 11:45. Oh, there's something in the chat. And then if you have any questions, go ahead and put it in the chat. But you can all take a break for 15 minutes. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. We'll wait a few moments for everyone to join us again. So we are now going to be going into our Voices from the Community section of the conference. And our first speaker is going to be Liew Watkins. So Liew Watkins is the founder and executive director of the Lace on Race Center for Racial Equity, which incorporates consulting, coaching, mediation, and also other resources. As well, the Lace on Race Cafe is a thriving adult online community dedicated to racial justice and applied relational ethics. You can find her organization at laceonrace.com/groups and facebook.com/laceonrace. So here is Liew Watkins presenting the 5 tenets, how durable is your tree? I think you're muted, yeah.
Am I muted now? Am I good?
No, you're good.
Okay, great. I am so excited to be here. Meleza, do we have our slides ready to go? And do we have our slides ready? I'm actually looking.
We're good to go as soon as you start.
Okay, terrific. And new title page does indeed stay. Let's go to first slide. I do not see slides. One of the things about doing, there he is. And here we go. I'm excited about this. All right. One thing I can't do is completely go full on, but we are going to do what we can. I don't know why we can't, but what we've been talking about so far is what I like to think of as the nuts and bolts of being educators, of being teachers, of being mentors, of being leaders, of, in short, being influencers. What we feel at Lace on Race, and I think that it is applicable and generalizable to every other learning environment, is there needs to be an element of trust. So extending ourselves to grow out. Next slide, please. We believe strongly, very strongly, in interior rigor drives exterior praxis. That is absolutely true for any other, those blinkings are getting me. That's true for anything that we do. It's true for how we teach. It's also true in terms of how we approach the educational environment, whether it be in a classroom, whether it be one-on-one mentoring or supervising, any time where you have the ability and the opportunity to sit with someone shoulder to shoulder and eye to eye. That means that at Lace on Race, one of the things that I say to my staff, and by the way, I want to give a great shout out to 2 of my staff members who are helping me today, Meleza Flores and Vicky Van Eldenhoff. They are amazing. They are one of 12 of my right hands, without which Lace on Race would simply not be possible. And one of the things that we do is we say at Lace on Race that the program part is important. It is essential, dare I say. What is actually even more important and more, here we go, exit minimize video. Oh my gosh, I can see myself. I'm so excited. Okay. One of the things that we say a lot is that it is important, the program. It's actually important, the administration, the pieces parts, the back end work of how we administer program. But the most important part is the relational between the people with whom you are co-creating a learning environment, the people with whom you are collaborating with as colleagues, as professional colleagues, and crucially, your relationship and the relational that you bring to the work itself. That means interior rigor. One of the things that I talk about a lot with my staff and my leadership team is the idea of taking off your shoes. Does anyone understand what I mean when I say this? What I mean when I talk about taking off your shoes is entering into the environment, be it a classroom, be it a one-on-one teaching or mentoring or supervising context, is a certain sense of reverence and call. It does not necessarily mean that you have to, I mean, I'm not talking about literally taking off your shoes before you go into the lecture hall, but I'm talking about bringing into this your entire self. Oh yeah, you can see my mug. I was looking at the notes. It's bringing your entire self into it. That means interior rigor. One of the things that maybe we'll talk about later in the question and answer series is something that I heard during some of the prior conversations when we were talking about being triggered, when we were talking about being activated. We need to be ready to be completely and totally present to the people with whom we are going to be sharing just not our knowledge, but our whole selves. That means doing the interior rigor first. Next slide, please. This is something that I say in various permutations a lot. One of the things that we who want to be revolutionary and radical educators, who want to be transformative leaders, is that one of the things that we're doing as we learn the tools is an acknowledgement, sometimes backburnered in the back of our minds, but also sometimes right front and center, that the tools that sometimes we are using are not necessarily to the benefit of those that we are teaching and mentoring and serving. Sometimes, and sometimes entirely too often, those tools were not set up to benefit those who we are learning, who we are teaching, are not set up to benefit their growth, their development, their praxis. In fact, when we look at the history of academics in America, so often, I have to plug in, so I'm actually going to another room. Thank God for really good technology. That way I'll make sure I don't lose you. One thing that we all need to be able to think about is the idea that we are indeed subversive. So the only reason to learn and apply the master's tools is to subvert them and then to leverage them, to craft, nurture, maintain, and demand, both from ourselves and to the institutions and the students that we serve, revolutionary and radical, and most important, effective praxis. That means we have to do the interior work to decide that we are not just doing it for ourselves, because it's so easy to just do it for ourselves. That means that sometimes the messages that we have, the messages that we give, the stance that we take can be very self-serving and self-aggrandizing. And that's one of the reasons I talk about taking off your shoes. You are not in the classroom for yourself. When I am mentoring and coaching, I am not sitting across from another person for myself. If you go into the Lace on Race Cafe or the Facebook page, what we call the takeout window, it's where it's the entry point, and I'm engaging with learners, I'm engaging with community members. I am not thinking about, am I going to get the upper hand? Do I want them to be impressed with how much I know? Do I want them to go, oh, she's got the credentials? No, I want them to leave better than where they started. That's effectiveness. That means that I not only am giving revolutionary and radical instruction, revolutionary and radical theory, revolutionary and radical methodology, but I am doing it in service to something greater and bigger. And if you cannot say that, wipe off your feet before you go into the classroom. That needs to be the reason, arguably the only reason. I come from a Mennonite background, and Mennonites for a very long time kind of had a hands-off approach to higher education. Certainly Amish did. Mostly Amish stopped their educations at 8th grade. And everyone thinks that it's really backwards and everything. And it's like, there's actually a reason for it. If you are not gaining higher education, gaining greater knowledge in order to serve, it is inherently self-serving. It is inherently hubristic. If I am going to go and get an advanced degree, which is awesome, my motivation needs to be there, which means I need to do the internal work. Because if the only reason I want to go is so that I can have a mortarboard and walk across the stage and pick up a diploma, that's going to show up in my classroom.
If I am not here for Talia, if I'm not here for Christine, if I'm not here for Abby, but I'm here to make sure that they know that I'm right, that they know that I have the upper hand, that it is a very top-down relationship, and LACE will always, always, always win, because that's what academia is like, right? That's not collaborative. That's not revolutionary. That is using the math tools not to subvert, but to actually collude with the power structures that all of us in this community that we formed right here for Praxis and Education today, that is actually in opposition to what we're about. Next slide, please. As we all know, a lot of the work that we do in our foundational work comes from Paulo Freire, and also one of his students, and who was a keynote at Praxis and Education in 2019, Antonia Darter. It is amazing how much it dovetails with the work that we do in LACE on Race. In fact, I was privileged to have Antonia say that to me. And wow, if you want to wonder whether or not I was grinning from ear to ear all around Lemon Grove for an entire month, that's why. So let's look at this quote. True generosity consists precisely in just what we were talking about before. Are you with me? Are you with me? Can I see some hands to see whether or not people are with me? Awesome. True generosity consists precisely in fighting to destroy the causes which nourish false charity. That's exactly what I was talking about when it comes to toxic motivation. Am I right? False charity constrains the fearful and subdued, the rejects of life, to extend their trembling hand. True generosity lands in striving so that these hands, whether of individuals or entire peoples, in our case learning cohorts, needs to be extended less and less in supplication from a bottom-up stance, so that more and more they become human hands which work, and I can't see the rest of the quote, but you guys can, there you go, which work and working transform the world. At LACE on Race, we call that a flat and round table where everyone sees each other eye to eye. Not looking down, not looking up, eye to eye. And when you can do that with the people with whom you are not just imparting knowledge, but you're imparting so much more, you are going to turbocharge not just your praxis, but your effectiveness. Next slide, please. This is the North Star of LACE on Race. This is why I get up in the morning. This is what is always top of mind when I am engaging, when I'm writing, when I'm making videos, when I'm talking to people at Sprouts, to lessen and mitigate the harm endured by Black and brown people, perpetuated by white people and white supremacy. Every word is important. And if you come to LACE on Race, we do a deep dive as to why each and every one of these words is important. But this reminds me of why I'm engaging in the first place, why I'm engaging in instruction, why I'm engaging in deep relational applied ethics. If this is not front and center, and if I'm not working in service to that, then I need to close my laptop and I need to just go and mop the floors or something, because it's not going to work. It's not going to work. To have something that is bigger than you is what we mean, is what I mean when I talk about having a radical praxis. Having a radical idea and conceptualization, and dare I use words that you don't usually hear in educational environments: expectation and hope and curiosity about what the person is and could become. That means using what we call at LACE on Race, fictive imagination. So I'm not just looking, for instance, at Mary. I'm not just looking at Charlene. I'm not just looking at Caitlin. I'm not just looking at Deanna as who they are right now in the present moment, wonderful as you all individually and collectively are. I am seeing a vision of who Abby can be 5 years from now. And I want to latch on to that vision, and I want to get her there. Next slide, please. Thank you. I'm not going to read this whole thing. I only got 25 minutes, but there are a lot of places in here, and we're going to allow you guys to have these slides so that you can take a deep dive into this as well. But what I want to talk about in this slide very particularly is the idea of how we think of and conceptualize the people with whom we are facing. I come from not an educational background, but a counseling background. My background is both in codependency and also addiction work. And how I conceive of the person sitting in front of me, whether it be in a group counseling situation or a one-on-one dyadic relationship, is, do I have a vision greater than they have of themselves? They're not just coming to me so that they can report whether or not they used opiates last week, right? I need to see them not just as a person who's an opiate user, but I need to see them in 10 years. I need to bring to them the hope that it's more of not just what they no longer do or what I'm imparting to them, but it's all in service of something bigger and greater, and that it stays eye to eye. Did you see that slide where Freire was talking about charity, what I call toxic charity? We need to talk about that, and I don't have time to talk about it a lot. But the fact of the matter is, even if you come from a working class background like I did, and I come from a working class background, those of you who are in San Diego know what I mean when I say I am OG Euclid and Logan. That's where I grew up. But now things have changed. Get a couple of nickels to rub together, you get a car that will almost absolutely get you from Lemon Grove to La Jolla. Do you see where I'm going with this? And all of a sudden, I am no longer in the same cohort, both materially and attitudinally, as of most of my students. As educators, you will most likely be teaching students probably sometimes a standard deviation below you in socio and economic capital. That makes a huge difference. I know that as someone who grew up in a primarily Black and Latino neighborhood 40 years ago, I'm an old lady, I'm 57, how it felt to have teachers who parachuted in. How must it feel to kids when they know that you are teaching them in an environment you're afraid to leave your car? Do you see where I'm going? If anyone is hearing me, if anyone is feeling resonating with this, can you give me a little bit of this or a thumbs up? It is very hard to be in systems where we are going to be part of, as Freire says, an established order, by definition, inherently an unjust order. At the same time, while we are working to challenge and subvert and dismantle it, we are working on two tracks, and we need to have that. The fact of the matter is, I enjoy my 2018 Santa Fe. I like it a lot. I'm not giving up my Santa Fe. That does not mean that my conviction has changed now that, you know, I have leather seats, right? And a heater that works, which I did not have 5 years ago. Because of this, I need to have a constant double consciousness. Both as a Black woman, and we do not have time to talk about racial and gender and sexual and gender and LGBT politics, but if you are from a marginalized class, you automatically are coming into the classroom with double consciousness, because we are fighting white people and white supremacy, toxic white supremacy, right? And people have internalized that, even if we are of color, sometimes especially if we are of color, and particularly if we are first generation people of color who managed to, put this in quotation marks, y'all, get out. Now we see ourselves, because society has told us that we're the exceptional ones, right? And it's like, well, you're one of the good ones. Well, if I'm coming into a classroom, if I'm coming into a group counseling situation, if I'm coming into a dyadic relationship thinking, I am so glad I got out of this. I'm so glad I'm not you, Christine. I'm so glad I'm not you, Meleza. That is so top down, and it will undermine and sabotage the eye to eye and the revolutionary nature of the work that you are trying to do. Next slide. Let's talk about expectation. This is something that I wrote, and you know what? Because I am that narcissistic, I think it's important enough for me to read out loud. Meleza, how much time do I have? How am I doing? You can just give me a thumbs up. Thanks. Expectation also makes room for the other. You have expectations of this space, in this case, in context, Lace on Race. And you are right too. Students have every expectation of you too, in the classroom, in a supervisory or mentorship or influence one-on-one. And they're right too. Expectation allows us to meet each other right in the eye, unlike the top-down way of blinded way of entitlement. Valid expectations, the valid expectations that I have of Talia. I keep on picking on you, Talia, because I see you, you're right next to me. Valid expectations of Talia help to pull up individually, in dyads, and together. If I have, whoa, okay, 5 minutes left. Okay, thanks, Meleza. I'll go fast. If I have no expectations of you, I am not seeing your capacity, volition, and agency. Not as learners and not as potential educators and leaders and influencers. Expectation, be it soft, exhorting, playful, even stern and unyielding, still comes with choice. And an invitation to engage all of you towards what you see in the other's eyes. And that means I need to be really mindful of what Talia sees in my eyes. I can be saying all the right things. I can be giving her really good instruction, really good encouragement. But if she's not seeing it in my eyes, it is all for naught. You can read the rest of it later. I only got 5 minutes. I gotta keep going. Next. We already talked about this. Capacity, volition, and agency. I'm gonna allow myself 30 seconds. We need to believe that not only our students, but ourselves have the capacity, that you have the capacity to impart and influence onto your students, onto your mentees, onto your supervisees, onto your advisees. You need to have the volition. You need to want to do it. You can't phone it in. You can't phone it in. And you need to have the agency, both for yourself and for your students. Not only that they can, but that they think that they can. It's that agency. It's that agency that will allow for a transformative experience if we allow it to. Next slide. We do not have time to talk about this, but this is a lot of like the learning process. Do you see that learning curve? And then you forget most of what you learned, but sometimes it's not forgetting, it's really resistance. Are you with me? Then we have to retrain and support and deal with the inevitable, let's call it what it is, relapse. I do come from an addiction background. Then we're doing change management, and then it happens again and again ad infinitum. That's what we need to be ready for. We need to not be gobsmacked or blindsided by relapses. Oh my God, Christine was doing so well and then I lost her. And then I give up on Christine. No, Christine was really great at that top of that curve. Something happened. Something happened. How do I get her back on track? And not just for me, but because I really think that Christine can. I do not have time to tell the story about getting to Escondido, but those of you who are in San Diego know that there's only one way to get to Escondido, am I right? You can only do it on the 15th. You can't do it on the 5. The 5 is a much prettier drive, really. You get La Jolla, you get the Mormon Temple, you get Solana Beach, but it won't get you to Escondido. Our job is to keep them on track to Escondido, no matter how difficult at least the beginning parts of the 15 are, am I right? Eventually, you will get to North County Fair, which is a really cool mall. Eventually, you'll get there, but we've got to get them there. We can't allow them to want to stay in the pretty part of the 5. It's a great drive. It won't get them where they need to go. We have the incumbent responsibility to be the ones that manage our own triggers, our own activations, that stay emotionally involved, invested, and regulated, because we're not just teaching instruction. We're teaching tools for life, and that includes emotional regulation. Next slide, please. That includes emotional regulation. That includes learning how to manage your own triggers and activations, because by the way, being triggered or activated is not the same as being harmed. And one of your jobs as potential educators, as aspiring educators who are going to go out there in the field, is to learn how to manage. I'm going to pick on you for a minute, Lauren, because I think that I've already sent Talia into needing a little bit of trauma counseling herself. But when it comes to Lauren, I need to remember, as much as I want to see her eye to eye, and as much as I want to be a friend and drink a smoothie with her in La Jolla, my job is to get her to Escondido, which means I need to be able to steer that ship in service to Lauren. Those of us who are in dyadic, mentoring, or relational work need to know that. And also, let's just say that Lauren reminds me of someone, because you do, Lauren. I had an ex-intern not even 3 months ago go cray-cray on me. It was awful. It was awful. I'm still dealing with some of the after effects of what Holly did, honestly. But you know what? I need to come to Lauren with fresh eyes, with beginner's mind. I cannot let the residue from Holly bleed into that, and we will do that. If you're looking in front of 30 people or 300 people in a large auditorium, there's going to be somebody that triggers or activates you, for good or ill. And we need to be able to manage that. We need to neither punish them or fawn to them. I need to neither enable Lauren, nor do I want to punish her for whatever's happened in the last 57 years of my life. Am I making sense so far? Okay, time. We're going to do this real fast. We can look at Hesed. This is the kind of love that I am talking about, that I want to give to Lauren. It is not hallmarks, hearts, and flowers love. And by the way, if there is no love in your educational practice, in your counseling practice, in your pastoral work, then you need to get out of Dodge. I hear that there are really, really good opportunities at Del Taco and a 20% discount on French fries. But if you do not love your students in a universal, non-hierarchical way, you can see how I define Hesed love. And we can talk about that later. Next slide, please. I got to go fast. We're going to talk about this later, maybe in Q&A, the balance between imparting knowledge and giving that kind of muscular love. We want to always be in top right quadrant. If you're here, you are never going to be in lower left quadrant. The tricky parts are lots and lots of love, hallmark flower love, but not a lot of knowing. That's not in service to your students or your learners. Or less Hesed, authoritarian, but more knowing. That is also not in service to your learners. The trick is finding that balance and finding that sweet spot. Next. Thank you, Melissa. Oh, wow, I'm only 2 minutes over. I want to say thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I hope that there is something that you want to take with you. And now I happily cede the floor to not only my colleague, but also my dear friend with whom I have slurped noodles and who brings me soup, because this is how an executive director leads. She serves. So I serve to you, Charlene.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Lace. As a reminder, we will have a Q&A panel after the next presentation. And so as Lace said, our next presenter will be Charlene Holkenbrink-Monk. Charlene is the Executive Director of the Dignified Learning Project, having co-founded it with Professor Che at SDSU in a master's level independent study class. She is a middle and high school humanities teacher and part-time sociology and research instructor at the Community College District and SDSU. She holds her BA in history from UCLA, her MA in sociology from SDSU, and is currently a PhD student in education through SDSU as well as Claremont Graduate University. So here is Charlene presenting Pedagogy in the Pandemics, Ethnography of Student Support and Implications for Future Research.
Thank you, Lace, for your presentation. It's always wonderful, and I'm excited to be following up because a lot of what I'm going to talk about has to do with expectations and specifically within the classroom. So give me 1 second. Let me present. You'd think that teaching online, I'd be more able to do this. All right, give me 1 second. For some reason, my PowerPoint is now oh my goodness. There we go. That should work. Okay. Can everybody see my slides?
Yes.
All right, I'm going to make them larger. Maybe. All right, cool. All right, so mine is kind of my specific research, or my specific presentation is going to be a little bit of kind of a generalized talk with some research that I've been conducting. So as mentioned, I am a current doctoral student right now, and part of my dissertation, I'm doing a couple of different layers. So like a pre-study, which is like a pilot study through a couple cycles. And so the first cycle was more just to identify a problem of practice. As I mentioned, really kind of at the core of who we are at the DLP and who I am as a person, my goal is always to embody praxis, right? I can talk all I want about what I feel needs to be done, but until I'm actually doing something and making moves is when I feel like I'm doing that. And so that's what this research is really to kind of was to identify what we were doing, what we were struggling with, and what areas of problems we were having as practitioners and teachers and such. And so this is pedagogy in the pandemic or pandemics. And this is a combination of what's called a reconnaissance cycle, as well as cycle 0. So today's word is unprecedented, brought to you by the year 2020. The biggest thing for me was that I was looking at how students were navigating their educational experience. So at our institution, we had been doing some contingency plans starting March 4th, because we knew it was happening. We knew schools were going to be closed. There was just no way that it wasn't. And so we had started planning. March 13th, the physical doors closed, and March 16th, we were online still already teaching students, when some of the districts that we were at around us were taking until the middle of April of last year to be online. For us, we started doing a lot of different things. We did like a survey beforehand, where we would call families as well as email families and work with students to figure out what tech they had available at home. Meanwhile, some of our neighboring districts were sending out technology surveys about accessibility through email and only email, which the irony was not lost on us, because of course, people who have tech are going to be the only ones who are going to respond to that. So we had the advantage that we are a small charter school, you know, all of the historical problems of charters aside, and modern day problems. But we really started thinking about, what did we have to shift? How did we have to change? And so we have a very, very unique system, and we have very, very different students from a wide variety of socioeconomic backgrounds, racial backgrounds, sexual orientation. We have a very diverse student body, which oftentimes, as much as we would like to think is the case for charter schools, is not. And we most educators went into this with assumptions, right, for COVID-19, myself included. And so what I had assumed, many people did, was that COVID-19 was going to present new issues, and it did present some new struggles, of course. But what we found was that, or what I found in the research, was that COVID-19 did not present necessarily anything new, but rather it exacerbated it. Going into it with a philosophy, my own personal philosophy of dialogue and critical pedagogy, I knew how I wanted to approach this. So what did we know, and what did I go into this? So a lot of the previous research, again, pointed to that the reality that, yes, right, some of the students were experiencing new things, like having to learn at the same time that they had their little siblings, but that wasn't new, right? A lot of our students would go home and still have to help their siblings with doing their homework or watching them. And so it wasn't necessarily new, but it just added, more stress and issues related to what they were already experiencing. And some of the participants even had noted that. Some of the ones who were much more, privileged would say, I was able to quit my job and have one parent who worked, and that was something that I know I had, but others didn't have. And then some others were saying how it was extremely difficult because they didn't feel that they had, while they had support from staff, they didn't feel that they they didn't have motivation to do it. And as I started interviewing more people and kind of observing things, I realized that it really wasn't a matter of, again, something new, but it was a matter of teachers, families, and students all kind of having an agreement that they really wanted more curriculum and more engagement with the materials, because while they felt we were very, very supportive in the emotional and mental aspects, that we weren't really engaging them academically in the ways that they were expected, which actually was interesting, because I went into it just looking at COVID-19 specifically. I didn't necessarily expect to come out with anything different, in the sense that I know that these structural issues are a reality. But what was interesting was that was what almost all participants and respondents had said, was that they didn't feel that teachers are prepared. And teachers said the same thing, that we have a school that really wants to be critical and do these things, but we don't have the supports to do it. So through this research, what I've proposed and have been approved for is to create a curriculum, and specifically a critical literacy framework for the school. So our WASC accreditation, which is the accreditation for high school, like secondary schools and colleges, we are currently going through that, and we're actually embedding the critical literacy into the WASC accreditation. And so what my hope is, my next step is going to be, is creating this critical literacy framework, though, around student voice. So the students, right, we talk about student led, this and that and everything, and we don't really understand what that means. And then tying it into the idea of expectations, which Lace, so wonderfully put, is that if we don't have some sort of foundational curriculum, we don't have that expectation, which then means that it is very easy for teachers and really anybody in any position of power, because there is that power dynamic between teachers and students, right, and then admin and teachers, et cetera, to really abuse that space and to not provide those expectations. And in turn, right, it's easier then to say, well, you didn't meet my expectations that I didn't actually put out there and explain to you explicitly what they are, so I'm going to fail you. So for what my next steps are going to be is a survey that's going to be focused around community cultural wealth and cultural capital, really focusing on what students want to learn and merging that together with these critical perspectives, as well as what students feel are important for their kind of long term, because we know that, like, philosophically, I wouldn't want to impose like neoliberal ideas into the education. But I also want to make sure my students sociopolitically are set up to be able to navigate the world around us, to be able to do the best that they can to pursue their dreams and have some sort of stable situation, because we know that the injustices and economic structures are not going to be dismantled overnight, as much as we would love to see that. So my job is to kind of bridge that gap. And so this critical framework is going to be focused on bringing together a true, genuine community effort in creating it, where students will also help me understand how to analyze data. And for me, the reason that these expectations are so important is because a lot of the teachers really, really, truly want to introduce these ideas, but they're not prepared, even in some of our conversations with each other. And if we really want to start being teachers that challenge that idea of a neutral education, which we know is not the case, right? We have to recognize first and foremost that we are either upholders of the status quo and oppressors, or we can start realizing ways to problem pose. And this framework is that, but it goes beyond just me doing it in my classroom. I can talk to my 8th graders about white supremacy. I can talk to my 10th graders about capitalism and economic structures, which I have, and they are so sharp. They had said, Miss Charlene, that looks an awful lot like a pyramid scheme. So they are aware, right? They're aware and they understand these things, but they aren't being exposed to it on the regular. And so this framework is an attempt to really try to do that on an institutional level, right? So it's a K-12 backwards way with expectations, though, but the expectations have to be done in a way that are clear and also intentionally challenging these oppressive systems, right? Because I can walk into a classroom and say, my expectation is be respectful, but respect might look very different across different cultures and backgrounds and experiences. So I have to be very clear what that is. And I have to be careful that I'm not being an oppressor with that, right? I could say, well, being respect is maintaining eye contact, but that's not going to be the case for many different identities, right? That could actually be very harmful for many people. Or understanding how we can build a shared community. And so approaching this framework is going beyond that beyond just this is what we do and this is what we cover, but it's how to do these actual strategic efforts to do this from a community way. And I think that's one of the things as we look at the role of curriculum, and there's either kind of like two ways to approach it. There's no curriculum and teachers have autonomy, which sounds great and all, except there are no expectations. And if you have somebody who hasn't done any unpacking to recognize that there is a power dynamic, you stand up in front of a class, you are already exerting your power, right? That in itself. So looking at these power dynamics is vital. Putting out clear expectations that intentionally challenge these systems. And as Lisa had pointed out too, right, making everything very clear and calling it what it is. I discussed with my students my recognition that I have power and that I also recognize the various levels, right, that I identify as white racially, but I also identify culturally and ethnically as Korean, and why those are so important. I discuss those things with my students, and the students are aware. They are aware. They can look at me and recognize what is the most obvious part of my identity, at least physically, right? And so we have to be clear with those, and we have to make sure that we're discussing these things, right? Discussing them and being very clear on what our goals are. And part of this framework will also be including students in analyzing state standards. So we discussed world history and what that meant. So we went through the standards, for instance, and they noted that in the California state standards for sophomores, Africa, for instance, all of Africa is mentioned twice in the curriculum, in a whole year's worth of world history, twice. That's it. All of Africa, twice in world history. So being able to discuss these things, right? My job is to, yes, have them try to meet those standards, but by meeting them where they're at too. But also explaining to them, yes, we have to meet these standards the best we can, but my job is to go beyond those. So now let's discuss why we even need to meet these standards and how can we go beyond that to dismantle this reality that these standards are by what we are saying is acceptable for students to learn, and why is it only that, right? So part of that curriculum is making sure that it's an institutional practice, right? I can do what I can all I want in the classroom, but if it's one classroom, which can make a change, we have to discuss what does that look like as a model for everything, and how can we encourage teachers to do it so families feel supported, and so students are genuinely gaining an education that is problem posing and empowers them or makes them realize their own power to be able to make these social change or the social change. And that is essentially all I have. I'm not going to get through all the literature because we can discuss that at another point.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Charlene, as well as Lace. So the next 10 to 15 minutes are going to be a Q&A for our two presenters. So please feel free to raise your hand over Zoom or ask questions in the chat. I have a question for you, Charlene. You've mentioned this concept of problem posing. I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit more, because I know I've heard about that in Che's class a few times as well, and it's something that is very interesting to me. So if you could speak a little bit more on that.
Absolutely. So problem posing, the way that I'm discussing it is in relation to Paulo Freire. And in Pedagogy of the Press, he discusses problem posing, right? You have this banking method, which is I, as the instructor, I'm telling you what to do, like what to learn, right? You should recite back to me that structural functionalism is, in a sociological way, right? Or 2 + 2 is 4, and just kind of this memorization that we're expected to kind of get down. Problem posing is an attempt to challenge that. So instead of just, and he presents this in his book in Pedagogy of the Press, that instead of just saying the capital of California, just as an example, right? Capital of California, Sacramento, we should be discussing why that is important, right? Not just that it is. What does it mean to have a capital? How does that explain these power dynamics as well, right? Where most of the power is held, how does this discuss policies and laws and everything? And so for me, it's really being able to encourage my students to think creatively and differently. And, you know, we hear the word critical thinking, which oftentimes is just masking the idea of, oh, let me think of how to reform, right? If I have something that is the analogy I have is if I have a pile of crap and I wrap it up in a pretty box and I put a bow on it, it's still a pile of crap, right? It's just prettier. And so the idea of a lot of times critical thinking is how can I critically think ways to still uphold the status quo? And problem posing for me is really to go beyond that, to really think about the power dynamics involved. So for my students, right, a good example, so I took over last year in the middle of an academic year, and the students were reading The Hate You Give. And the teacher before was giving them audiobooks, and she would just play the audiobooks and they would listen, which I'm not anti-audiobook, don't get me wrong. That's not my point here. My point is that though they weren't engaging in conversation on what that book meant. So if you just hand a book to somebody and you say, read it because it's diverse and it challenges these things and it has, problems of injustice in the world, that's not going to do anything. So we started talking about the role of redlining, for instance, and how that plays a role in the main character's experience, and why that was presented. We started talking about some of the modern circumstances that were going on, like police brutality and anti-Black racism, and finding parallels between the literature as well as the real world experiences. So for me, problem posing is being able to look at something and say, okay, so this is what I'm being presented. But now let me dig a little deeper. And at the heart of everything I do is I try to look at those power dynamics, right? Like the role of, who has power and how is that playing a role in what we learn and why we aren't questioning it. And so problem posing for me looks at that. It is the attempt to really start digging deeper in what we're being presented.
Thank you so much for that. There's a question in the chat from Diana. And they want to know that they are curious about what is happening with standardized testing, such as SATs, GREs, LSATs, MCATs, in response to the pandemic. Are K through 12 and higher education institutions still relying on these tests or not? If either of you guys have an answer to that.
So as of right this minute, most institutions of higher ed are not relying on them. But what that might look like afterward is up in the air. As for K-12, yes, we are still expected to be administering standardized testing. And yes, this will impact a lot of what we're doing. And yes, I've already administered 3 practice tests, maybe 4 already, because the expectation is that they are still going to have to somehow prove themselves on a standardized test.
I have a
for
quick
me.
question.
Oh,
Go ahead.
go ahead.
Oh, no. You could follow up on that. Yeah.
Yes, again, I'm not coming from an educational background, but I am coming from a psychological background. There is an amazing series that's on Radiolab. Some of you might have seen it. It's called G, and it talks about the history of standardized tests in general, intelligence tests in particular, and why for a very long time, the state of California did not administer intelligence tests. And a lot of times, basically standardized tests are just really blunt instrument IQ tests to Black students because there was a lawsuit. We know that they're inherently racist. We know that they're inherently classist. And so basically, again, it's almost impossible to dismantle the master's house using the master's tools, but we can beat those tools into submission. And a lot of times we can do that by making the covert overt. I wonder what it would have been like 40 years ago when I was in high school and middle school, if the teacher had come up before us, this is an absolutely BS test, but it's going to determine, and just be really honest about it. It really is going to determine funding. It's going to determine where you go, whether or not you're going to be recruited to be cannon fodder for the Navy or the Army, or whether or not SDSU or the UC system is going to give you a second look. That is actually very empowering. There is knowing that there is a difference between how the world sees a given student or a given learner and how you, the educator, sees that learner or that student is something else. It says, I am not what the world sees me. If you, in your eyes, eye to eye, and the student feels it and believes it, which means it's got to be authentic, y'all. If they see it and feel it, they will rise to that or not. That's it.
Thanks, Lay. So I just had a quick comment. Thank you both for presenting. They were amazing presentations and much needed. Lace, I think actually the question I was asking Shawn and David earlier, I think your presentation perfectly answered my question. I think we truly need more of that for our educators. Some type of cultural training really of really challenging them to challenge themselves to ask the question, what am I doing as an educator, right? Why do I teach? For who do I teach, right? With what purpose? And I think that's what I was trying to get at when I was asking David and Shawn. So, you know, I think if we could keep pushing to have, you know, you and your organization and, you know, more people who do work like you to, you know, help bring together other educators, it would be amazing. For both you and Charlene.
May I make a quick plug?
Yes, of course.
On our website, we have Lace on Race, the Facebook page, which we call the takeout window. It's your entry point. We have laceonrace.com, which is kind of the formal one. When I want to look impressive, that's where I send people. It looks really good, and you can thank Maleza for that. But we also have what we call the Lace on Race Cafe, which is different groups for different cohorts. We have millennials, we have boomers, we have educators. We have parents. And so we can all look at social justice and racial justice from that lens. One of the things that I say at Lace on Race a lot is who you are here is who you are. There should be as little daylight as possible between the persona that you are in your classroom, and in my case, Lace on Race, right? I'm Lace on Race. That's my persona. It's 98% me, just plain old Lace from Lemon Grove, right? But a lot of times there is a big difference. And I can always tell in a therapy room, like when we're doing counseling or whatever, in pastoral work and in education, whether or not there is this gulf between who this person is in the classroom and who they actually are. Kids particularly, I mean, I've noticed that adult learners will give me the benefit of the doubt if they feel something's a little off. And I think that Charlene would be able to corroborate this because she works both in post-secondary education and in K through 12 education. Kids don't give you the benefit of the doubt. They can tell hockey sticks a mile away, like bull hockey sticks. I'm trying to keep it G-rated. They can tell that from a mile away. And it doesn't matter what you give them good if they are feeling that it's coming from an inauthentic place, from an inauthentic person. Why do I want to learn from you, Charlene, if I don't trust you? That's it.
I think that, so someone asked a question in the chat that goes right along with this topic. Laurie said, Lace, intention and authenticity go far. During interactions, do you think that is important to explicitly announce yourself as a safe conversational partner? Why or why not?
I love that question. And I also want to say that I know and love Laurice, but I did not pay her to give me this softball question. It is an amazing question and I'm grateful for it. I think that it is important to make the covert overt when there is something like this going on. I'm going to allow myself 30 seconds and no, I did not ask Laurice to give me this so I could tell this story. I'm currently in consult with a therapist in Dallas she is a white woman and she has a supervisee who is going for her licensure, and Nicole is going to have to sign off so that she can get the licensure. But there are some real issues. And so one of the things is, and part of that is that power dynamic. Here, this pretty blonde white woman is supervising this woman of color who also has other barriers. And one of the barriers is during her master's program in another institution, she was co-counseling with another pretty blonde white girl from Dallas. Basically, do you get the picture in your head? And the supervisor of that group, case analysis group, asked her, so do you feel weird talking to someone who's so pretty, who's so much prettier than you are? I totally get where the supervisor was going with that. But it's an awful thing to say. What he was saying is, are you able to meet this woman eye to eye, without resentment, without residue from your past lives? Are you looking at her at just the pretty, it's like, she's the worried well, she's probably neurotic, but there's nothing wrong with her, because you will bring that into the consulting room. But if the practitioner, if the therapist, if the teacher in encountering makes the covert overt, yeah, guess what? I am having some problems here, and here's why, and here's what I'm going to do to mitigate it. So can we co-collaborate? Sometimes you can't say that specifically, but you can make it very, very overt. I can create and this is what we use at Lace on Race. We don't say safe space. We say safe-ish. That's a huge difference. I will be as safe as I can with you, Lauren, as we explore topics that are inherently unsafe. And so one of the things that I suggested to Nicole is that she write 2 performance reviews, and she shows her hand. This is the interview, this is the performance review I want to give you at the end of this process. This is the review that, gun to my head, I'd have to give right now. I want to get you to Escondido, and I want to collaborate with you on this process that, by the way, is crappy, because I'm assessing you on things that may or may not have anything to do with real world counseling and coaching and consulting practice. And you can actually talk about that in education, because what you learn here may or may not dovetail with what you learn once you sit your butt in the classroom. Am I right? So let's talk about this. Let's talk about getting you here, externalizing the problem, Larice, externalizing the problem. The problem is not the student. The problem is not the coach. The problem is the crappy system that both of them are working under. So let's make that system the enemy. Let's figure out a way to get you licensure that matters and that is authentic, because I want everything I say to you to be true. But let's also know that basically it's all crap, because basically you can be a really good counselor without hitting any of these metrics. But you need to hit the metrics so that you can go out and be subversive and revolutionary and radical. So you are showing your whole hand. And I think that part of the power dynamic is that teachers and educators and therapists and pastors do not want to show their hands. That's power. Pull back the curtain. Let them know. Let them know. Forewarned is forearmed. And showing people how the sausage is made is a revolutionary and a very generous act. I hope I made some sense.
Thank you so much, Lace, and also Charlene, for all of your guys' insight, and thank you all for participating. So this concludes our Voices from the Community section of the conference. We'll pass it over to Abby.
Yes, everyone, it is 12:42, which means it is lunchtime, and we'll be having our community lunch session right now, so we can eat lunch together, or you can step away from your laptop and eat lunch. Some of us would like to break bread together and share experiences from this pandemic, so feel free to join us and engage in some conversation. But for those of you who decide to step away from your laptop, we'll return at 1:45.
Thanks, Abby. And really quick, I actually want to give like about 15 minutes for our whole team to actually step away too, so we can all grab our food before we come back for the lunch hour. Okay, so we'll meet back at about in 15 minutes. So about 1:08, I think. Is that? Oh, wait. Yeah, okay.
It's 12:45 right now, so how about 1 o'clock?
And before we get started, I want to stress that this isn't a lecture. It's not a traditional workshop. But with that said, I'm going to blabber on for a couple of minutes. So bear with me, and I apologize in advance. But by now, based off all these presentations and this discussion of Freire, I think we can all recognize that transformative education, truly transformative education, can't involve this traditional banking method where students were much more than lifeless containers to be filled with hand-picked knowledge that's chosen by instructors and teachers who see themselves as the ultimate authority. Students were human beings, and transformative education is a humanizing process. And to Paulo Freire, this process of humanization, what he calls authentic liberation, I quote, he says, "Liberation is a praxis, the action and reflection of men and women upon their world in order to transform it." And that praxis of transformation is really the heart and soul of this call to action dialogue. We're coming together to reflect on our reality and our education system. And I hope we don't just discuss these issues, leave the conference and kind of feel good about ourselves for the rest of the day, but then just forget about everything tomorrow. I mean, that seems to happen a lot in education. I think we've already brought that up. What I hope we're thinking about is what are some of the dehumanizing values and functions of our system of education? And what are some of the more human qualities and functions that we'd like to put in place instead? Martin Luther King Jr., he once wrote in a piece we're about to read, he wrote that the goal of true education is not just intelligence, but intelligence plus character. Values that promote the good of humanity, like compassion, dignity, respect, kindness, patience, justice, and love. And you really needed some patience for me to read all those values, so thank you for that. And now that brings us to step 2 of our dialogue. We're not just reflecting for reflection's sake. We're reflecting with the intention of developing strategies and actions that we can begin taking to transform education and our world. And I know I sound like a broken record as everyone's talking about this, but that's what I hope we come away from this dialogue with, are some steps that we can take to start transforming education now, whether that's collectively, individually, or both. And I also want to stress before we get started that this is an open dialogue. Anyone who wants to participate can and should participate, and everyone was doing a great job of participating during the lunch hour, so I don't really see a problem with that. And whether it's the chat or the microphone, if your roommate was watching over your shoulder, really anyone can participate. Send anyone you want the Zoom link. And now I know that you've all anxiously been awaiting the moment when I shut up and let all of you who are probably much smarter and have much better ideas than me start participating. And don't worry, that moment's almost here. And I can tell you that I've been looking forward to it just as much as you. But I just want to give one final reminder and request. And this doesn't, I feel like I don't even need to say this just based off the discussion that we've already had, but just a reminder and request that we treat each other with respect and dignity during this dialogue, and that we keep in mind what Paulo Freire calls the ontological vocation of becoming more fully human, or of the ontological vocation of all human beings. And that vocation is to act on and transform our reality with the goal of becoming more fully human. It's what he essentially terms as our reason for being, to come together in the continuous effort to make our world a better place. And those of you who know Professor Che know that he says it fairly often. What else are we going to do with our lives other than fight oppression? So with that, I'd like to welcome everyone to our 2021 Call to Action Dialogue on Transformative Education. And I'm going to pass it to Lauren.
Great. Thank you so much, Spencer, for that amazing introduction. Like Spencer says, it's really going to be a conversation, a dialogue that we're going to have today. So we will be reading The Purpose of Education by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I just sent the file in the chat box so you can pull it up, and I will also share my screen while I read it. Don't worry, it's a really short reading, about a page and a half, maybe even less than that. So to preface it, I came across this reading while I was a TA for Professor Che. We thought it would be good to use because in our class, it was important for us to ground what education meant to us. What was the purpose of us teaching Sociology 101? Why we think it's important for our students to not only take our class as a requirement, but to perhaps take some of the lessons, the concepts and the values from it as well. So with that, I'll share the purpose of education. Really, we named this a call to action element because this conference itself, it's a call to action. I think most of us, are wondering, what can we do? What can we do? Especially with everything that has been going on this past year, but of course, even before that. I think, really at the most basic level, we need to meet together, right? I think I've been hearing over and over again today that people miss the social element. People really value the community. People are valuing today just having the ability to meet with people who are sharing similar concerns, going through similar experiences, and have similar values. So that was our hope for this conference. And I hope that all of you are finding that today to some degree. So let's move to the reading. All right, so this is by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He wrote this as a student actually for one of his school newspapers. So it is entitled The Purpose of Education, Morehouse College, 1948. As I engage in the so-called bull sessions around and about the school, I too often find that most college men have a misconception of the purpose of education. Most of the brethren think that education should equip them with the proper instruments of exploitation so that they can forever trample over the masses. Still others think that education should furnish them with noble ends rather than means to an end. It seems to me that education has a twofold function to perform in the life of people and in society. The one is utility and the other is culture. Education must enable a person to become more efficient, to achieve with increasing facility the legitimate goals of their life. Education must also train one for quick, resolute, and effective thinking. To think incisively and to think for oneself is very difficult. We are prone to let our mental life become invaded by legions of half-truths, prejudices, and propaganda. At this point, I often wonder whether or not education is fulfilling its purpose. A great majority of the so-called educated people do not think logically and scientifically. Even the press, the classroom, the platform, and the pulpit in many instances do not give us objective and unbiased truths. To save people from the morass of propaganda, in my opinion, is one of the chief aims of education. Education must enable one to sift and weigh evidence, to discern the true from the false, the real from the unreal, and the facts from the fiction. The function of education, therefore, is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. But education which stops with efficiency may prove the greatest menace to society. The most dangerous criminal may be the person gifted with reason, but with no morals. The late Eugene Talmadge, in my opinion, possessed one of the better minds of Georgia, or even America. Moreover, he wore the Phi Beta Kappa key. By all measuring rods, Mr. Talmadge could think critically and intensively, yet he contends that I am an inferior being. Are those the types of men we call educated? We must remember that intelligence is not enough. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education. The complete education gives one not only power of concentration, but worthy objectives upon which to concentrate. The broad education will, therefore, transmit to one not only the accumulated knowledge of the race, but also the accumulated experience of social living. If we are not careful, our colleges will produce a group of closed-minded, unscientific, illogical propagandists consumed with immoral acts. Be careful, brethren. Be careful, teachers. Yeah, so that concludes that reading. We'll open this up for discussion right now. First off, I wanted to ask how many people, kind of by show of virtual hand, have read this before or heard of it? So perhaps not many. I think starting there, that's really interesting, right? MLK is one of the most infamous civil rights activists of our time. Not our time, but you know what I'm saying. And I Have a Dream really is the speech that he is most known for. It's interesting that a piece like this is not part of our regular curriculum, right? And I think that's part of what I want to ask today. Why isn't more literature like this short reading that's very powerful and impactful not well known amongst our educated people?
When I read this piece, I was reflecting a lot about, is education fulfilling its purpose today? And I was, sorry, Lauren, were you done? I wasn't, okay. And yeah, I was just, kind of reflecting on my education since COVID has started and online education. And personally, I've been having a really difficult time. I am experiencing a lot of both like physical and mental hardships with online education. And so I was talking about it with the other interns, and I decided that I wanted to put out a survey on on my Instagram story about in my community to see if other people were having similar experiences as me. And I just wanted to read out some of the experiences that other people have been having since online education started. And I know we were talking about this a little bit in the lunch hour, but yeah, so these are things that people in my community were saying. They were saying that it's harder to take classes seriously. Professors don't check in with asynchronous classes. It's harder to find the time and space to do things for your mental health. Lots of headaches, impairment after sitting at the computers for hours at a time, inability to drive after class. I know some people who actually developed ocular migraines from all of the looking at your computer screen. Eyesight got worse. My eyesight personally got worse. Tired all the time. Professors are assigning more work, and there were a ton of other responses. I know other people were talking about their experiences as well earlier. And so when we're talking about the values that Spencer brought up earlier about how education should be centered around values such as respect and patience and compassion and kindness, we don't see these values being honored in the way that education looks today. And so I wanted to kind of create a space for us to talk about this with the community, because I don't feel like that space already exists, especially at SDSU. So if anybody else wants to speak on this, or any of the other interns want to talk about this, or Professor Che, please go ahead. But these are things that I was thinking about when I was, reflecting on, is education fulfilling its purpose today?
I know one thing that resonated for me specifically in the Martin Luther King Jr. piece. I was thinking about this last night, was the part where he says the person gifted with reason but no morals is a really dangerous criminal. And I think in a lot of ways that links back to capitalism, where you're taught how to exploit and how to maximize profit at the expense of humans. And I used to be a marketing major, and we had this one class called called consumer behavior. And that class, like I was thinking about that, it really stuck out to me. We learned all these techniques, how to sell people stuff that they didn't need, like just perfect ways to deceive people into buying things that they didn't need, or buying more of something that they wanted, but maybe you throw in an extra deal. And there was no actual ethical component to this class. It was all, here's the technique, here's how you sell people stuff that they don't need, but why are we doing this? Do they really need this? Is this benefiting our society in a certain way? And that, just in particular, that piece, that part of the piece really stuck out to me, because I could see it in I saw it in myself, and I saw it in a lot of my other students in the marketing major. Yeah.
What was that class called?
Consumer behavior. It was really interesting. I forgot pretty much everything I learned, but if you want to figure out how to sell people shit that they don't need, then take that class.
So it's a good class if you want to be in sales.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Spencer. I think that many people can relate to that, not just in a very specific course like that, but perhaps even, the whole purpose of going to college in general, right? That's a question I want to challenge all of you, especially students and educators, to ask yourselves. Why am I attending an institution of higher education, right? What is it for? I think Lace used the term self-serving, right? Is it a self-serving purpose to just gain social mobility and climb up the ladder, right? Or, you know, what do we value education as too? And I think this is a difficult question to ask as well, because many of us, I don't think, go into it with ill intentions, even if, you know, the purpose is for, you know, bettering your own life. Because, you know, the reality is we have to put food on the table. We have to provide for our families. We have to provide for ourselves. So asking that question, I understand, is not an easy thing to do, right?
In my perspective, like the purpose of education right now, like it has been commodified, because like I know people who only go to college and try to get into a degree that's gonna like get them a good job to make money. Like that's their purpose. And I know it's not like for the majority of the people, but like all the people that I know, and I ask them like, what do you want to do in college? They tell me, oh, I want to get a degree that gets me a good job to make some money. And so yeah, like to me, education right now, like you have this pressure to, I don't know, get good grades and get a degree and get a good job. And yeah.
Yeah, I also want to chip in. Speaking from a country that used to be at least a lot more progressive in certain ways. At one point back in the 70s and 80s, I don't know if MLK was required reading in high school, but I know that Freda was critical pedagogy with the purpose of creating critical consciousness around the students. But there came a point in the 90s, early 2000s, when this discourse around education changed in Denmark. We actually had a prime minister who in a speech said that he was tired of having students just sitting around asking, well, what do you think? And he instead wanted to implement the what we call black schooling. I don't know if that's the word in English, but what essentially is the banking method. And his reason for saying this was that Denmark was falling behind in SAT scores. So like in the international how do you say, comparison between countries, we were starting to fall behind. And yeah, what I wanted to say with this is that the reason why such types of education is not implemented and is not popular today is exactly because globalization has us not only competing with each other, but competing internationally. So countries can't afford, as it is right now, to have people who are focused on critical consciousness rather than learning how exactly, as Spencer was speaking about, how to sell people stuff that they don't need. And the problem was that the discussion about whether or not Freda and critical consciousness as part of education was essential, was based around this idea of whether or not it made us competitive in the long run. So the entire basis for the discussion was ruined. And we see it right now as well with the university that we used to attend, because that is officially, it is a critical university. but right now it's getting defunded quite a lot, especially exactly because they don't feel that they get students who are able to, go out and sell their labor on the market. They don't want students who are critical and who asks questions and who is not focused on efficiency and is not focused on implementing new digital technologies in order to save money or stuff like that. So it's counter to the entire capitalist system to have critical education, I would say, in like the broad sense.
I think those are great points, Marcus. Thanks for offering that perspective, because it's definitely troubling too when, even as you said, if your country was considered more progressive in a sense, and even then, right, you're running against this issue as well.
I just want to bounce off what you just said quickly, Marcus. How you're saying it's not in the best interest for a capitalist world or capitalist society to have people thinking critically. And I think that is the #1 issue with our education system here in the United States, is that it's specifically meant to socialize you to the norms that are perpetuated through white supremacy and through all of these things that we're trying to fight against. And I think that's why, like, this idea of transformative education is so, so important, because if we could base our education more on, I think, individuality of students rather than the banking method, then I think we could have a much bigger impact on, building a society that works for everyone, rather than continuing to perpetuate through our education system prejudice and class war, essentially. And even kind of a side note about what Spencer just said about, his class and about the connection between education and character. I think, San Diego State, I think, does, or tries to do, certain professors try to do a really phenomenal job on including social issues into their curriculums and their studies. But I think so much of that really depends on the classes that you're taking, on the majors that you're choosing, and like what you've decided you wanted to go to school for. Like, if I only wanted to go to college at SDSU to market myself, then that's all I'm going to learn, because they're willing to only teach me that, and I think that really is kind of another issue, is that we have to start with, I don't know what I'm trying to say. You guys know what I mean though, right? Yeah, okay.
I'm just going to jump in. That totally reminds me of like teaching students, being a TA, and how some students are just there because either they have other motives instead of wanting to be there to actually learn. And one of the things will always be like, well, I don't have time. I don't want to take this introduction class. Like, this isn't part of going to my major or being part of the degree I want to get. And then it's like a step back, because it's just like, it just feels like a lot of people don't have that time or don't want to get that time in taking other classes that are not part of their major to learn. And I can't say about online, since I was still in school, like in a regular setting, but yeah, being in grad school was a lot different than it's an undergrad, but I just feel like everything that everyone has mentioned, people were still feeling those pressures and stressors, even in-person class. I just like how do I question this? I'm just thinking like when I was in high school and I wanted to go to college was because I thought I would finally be in appropriate space with people that wanted to learn more, be in another critical thinking, like actually wanted a process of like, why are we learning all these social norms, or why is like public education K through 12 the way it's systematically for everyone to go through. And then once I got to college, it was really, really like commodified. It was really like, oh, I'm here because like my parents gone through it and they're helping me go through it. Or it's just because I want a better position in the working world. And how do you motivate students of wanting to learn more and not have this negativity of like, oh, I'm being forced to take all these other classes that are not part of my major? Because by then I feel like students and a lot of people are so unmotivated to be where they're at.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing, Aurelie. I see some kind of activity in the chat. Laurice, I think your comment about kind of reiterating what Lace was saying about the gatekeeping function of education is very relevant, right? I think that's one of the things we do want to address here. You know, the issue of students seeing education just as a pathway towards a job, right? How do we challenge that, especially when these institutions of higher education are function and designed exactly in that framework?
So I think I'm just trying to process kind of everything. And I think that's a really good point too, Lauren, is that this idea of transformative education, at least from the perspective of the DLP and those of us involved and speaking on behalf of myself, is to address that, exactly what Lauren was saying, to the idea of rigor, right? So I think too often in our society, we associate rigor with upholding the status quo, rigor with like, when we see something that is very much with the intention of trying to weed out students or sort them in a certain way, we often think about that as rigor. And I'm not saying that that's the case in anybody here, right, per se, but I think in our society, that's kind of what we think about it. When there's different modes of assessment, right, there's different ways that we can assess people with different experiences or strengths and such, with the intention though, and focus on it being still rigorous, right? So for me, at least, with the idea of problem posing, that is rigorous, because you're thinking about not just the what's and how's, but the why, right? So going back to what I think it was I can't remember who it was in the chat, but somebody had mentioned about not just the framing of like what's happening when I was discussing the importance of California state standards, right? But also why. So for my students, right, a part of that rigor is not just discussing something that's beyond the standards, because the standards sociopolitically are important for them to meet, right? For them to be able to graduate high school and go on to do whatever they're going to do. And that is important. But I also think looking at those deep questions, diving deep and being able to think critically with what's going on it can be a part of that rigor, right? Yes, sometimes that rigor is eliminated just for the sake of we conflate also a lack of rigor with equity, which those two are not the same either. And I think a lot of times it goes back to the idea of expectations, making clear your expectations. You know, for me, I'm big on rubrics. So like telling my students like exactly how, you know, if it's like a point system or whatever it might be, explaining to them exactly, you know, what the expectations are to meet this, so that way I can assess that they are learning, right? But also making sure that I impose a critical thinking or a problem posing perspective in everything that we're doing. So yes, I do think that is important too, because sometimes we, again, will say, oh, well, we're going to have these conversations and we're going to think critically, but we don't have some sort of like rigorous scholarship that's attached to it for the sake of learning and personal growth. But I do think that a lot of that is also a reflection of our society that equates education as an economic ladder, right? Or a stepping stool for ourselves. It's the idea that if you get an education, you're being given the boots to pull yourself up from, when that's not how that is, even if education is equal access. And so I do think that we can and do tend to see a matter of just kind of letting students just get by and not do anything, but they don't have to be. And I think that when we start questioning the whys and looking at it from a true problem posing and a perspective of true generosity, as Ferry talks about, is necessary for us to make sure that we're not losing that kind of deep digging and scholarship that you're referring to, simply for the sake of, you know, jobs and some sort of individualistic growth.
Thanks, Charlene. I think, yeah, that does help a lot in framing, you know, these questions that we're asking. Is there anyone else who wants to point anything else out from the reading or from the discussion that we haven't gotten to yet?
Let me chime in just for a second. I had already mentioned, you know, during lunch, I was just kind of talking with Christine and Marcus that we will judge the success of this conference with respect to how much or less I talk. And because I've been talking so little, I think the conference has been a really, really a rousing success, right? There's an inverse relationship because this is a conference by students, for students. So intentionally, we're trying to keep out faculty voice. I am not actually speaking to you now as a faculty or a professor, but I am actually kind of responding as a community member, as a person just on this space. So having listened to all the, you know, from Calvin all the way down and so on and so forth, what resonated with me, I think that may link everything somewhat, is Spencer, can you read off the foundational ideas that you mentioned?
Compassion, dignity, respect, kindness, patience, justice, and love.
And those were ideas that you said there were foundational values that were inextricably united with education, right? That's what you're talking about.
And
transformative education.
And like the betterment of humanity in general.
Yes, yes. So the kind of foundational, and I'm sure there are other values that we could add, or some of you might think that there might be 4 that are more important than others. It doesn't matter. But I feel as though what resonated with me was that if in fact we're very serious about upholding some of the values that Spencer mentioned for a transformative education that will actually promote the well-being of human beings, right? Or the human progress or humanity, dignity, respect, compassion, and so on. Well, I really have a hard time thinking that any institution would reject those values. As a matter of fact, if you actually go and look up mission statements or vision statements of any university, I guarantee you they're gonna have some of those values in there, right? They're gonna say something like for the greater good, right? You know, for supporting human, I don't know, progress or something of that nature. Well, I think part of the call to action we could do as students, and I love what Lei said, you know, making covert overt, but I think sometimes it may even be much more simpler than that. We might actually just ask them to uphold what is overt. And overt is, if we were to ask our faculty, do you stand by the idea of dignity or compassion, right? Or respect? I have a hard time believing that somebody would say no. Of course they do. Then we actually have to make sure, hold them accountable, their syllabi reflect these values, right? If their syllabus actually reflects these values, there's no way then you could have a faculty like Cecilia mentioned, who actually had to drive 8 hours to go get their fingerprint for their DACA eligibility, was getting an A in the class, and the professor says, I'm sorry, I can't give you that time off. So then she went from an A in that class to a C. That action violated dignity, respect, compassion, and whatever else that Spencer had mentioned, right? So then the idea is we also have, that's exactly, I think, what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was talking about, right? We actually have to have a moral component in our education. So then the question then becomes, and Deanna, you were mentioning this about certain faculty members, right? They actually demand that you have your cameras on, right? Or they demand. What a lot of faculty members do, and I know this is not what Charlene meant, but what a lot of faculty members do is they actually make decisions based on formulaic things. So they have a formula, they make a decision. Why don't you make a decision based on dignity? Why don't you actually come to a decision after you have thought about compassion? These are what we actually in community-based work call coming to a wise decision, right? So if we could come to a wise decision, then we don't have to worry so much about, am I checking off this box or that box? Am I being fair to everyone? You know, and I understand certain faculty who say, well, if I were to give you that time off 8 hours, I'd have to give it to somebody else. Not necessarily. I don't see anybody waiting in line that has to drive 8 freaking hours to get a fingerprint. Now, if you have 25,000 students waiting in your office hours because they're also saying, I gotta do that too, well, give them that great time, right? So it's not that difficult, folks. In some ways, it's not difficult at all because we engage in these things already in our daily lives, right? So, I mean, and somebody asked Calvin, I think, right? How should the university react to, right? What should their statements be after a traumatic event or whatever, right? Again, if we're to come to a wise decision, we wouldn't, as a university, give out this crazy, inane, right, superficial kind of thing. I'll give you an example. San Diego State instituted something called a land acknowledgement on everybody's syllabus, right? Where now just all the faculty members have to make a land acknowledgement of stating we are on, San Diego State University is on the traditional Kumeyaay land. And we say something like, and we are borrowing from them. We're thankful for them and so on. Really? Why don't we really ask the Kumeyaay if in fact we're borrowing this land from them? Rather than making this land acknowledgement at the superficial level of saying, you know what? Yes, we have taken this land away from. No. You know what an action would be? Let's get the hell out. If we acknowledge that we're actually on the sacred land of Kumeyaay, if we're on the sacred land of Apache, why don't we just leave instead of making that land acknowledgement, right? We need to pack up and leave. Let's do it. Let's get it done, right? Kumeyaay may actually say we could live together, right? We don't know that. But as invaders, we gotta go. Forget about land acknowledgement. You know what our job is right now? We should be packing up. Let's start packing up. Yep. Let's start packing up. And by the way, clean up after us of all the things that we've actually done to this land. So in that sense, yes, there are specific things that needs to be done, right? And we know it. Absolutely, we know it. And this is what I think call to action dialogue through reading Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s Purpose of Education is all about. What is he saying? If you actually are educated in understanding certain moral components, how can you not act? How can you not act? The reason why we don't act is because we don't actually have what Lace would call the North Star. Because they've never shared the North Star with us. And every time we try to look for the North Star, they close the curtains on us, right? So the question becomes not how do we act? I think more so than that, I would always ask, how would you not act once you know? Right? And that's the purpose of education, so that we get to know. Because once we know, we won't be looking for each other to say, where do we act? When do we act? How do we act? We will act, right? Absolutely, we will. So part of the question then is, right, or the part of this is, yes, we need to get rid of banking method of education because it's getting in the way of us engaging in problem posing education, or what would consider, right, critical thinking, or what Martin Luther King Jr. considered, right, the moral component of learning. So, for me, I felt as though, listening to all the amazing presentations, the dialogue, I think this space itself, we're doing something, right? And most of you are here still sticking around, not because you're getting extra credit, right? There were about 50 some people who actually started, almost 60, and now we're left with about 37. Nobody's holding a gun to our heads. We're here because we really want to figure some things out, right? So in that sense, I think creating spaces like this, being together in spaces like this is really empowering, at least for me. And that's why I said, I'm coming to you not as a professor, but as a community member. So I feel empowered by this space, by what I've heard today for 4 hours, and all the things that I've learned. So I just want to say thank you to my community members and my brothers and sisters and my family who are on this screen. That's all.
Thank you, Dr. Che, for everything you shared. And I think just like the discussion that you started off with, talking about those different morals that Spencer listed, including compassion, dignity, respect, justice, patience, kindness, love. I think that's something that I've thought a lot about too, right? I think that is really important for transformative education. It's necessary to have those things in transformative education. And honestly, and thinking about all of this, I think a lot about you and being your student. And because I think you and my other professor, Professor Draz, are one of my favorite professors this semester, because you all practice those things and embody those things in class. I still remember when, I think you might have said it near the beginning of the semester, or even throughout the semester, how you emphasize and talk a lot about that you care about all of us, and that our relationships aren't severed from one another, but that we're just all connected to each other, even though we might not know each other that well. And I don't know, I feel like hearing those things from a professor or a teacher, it makes a big difference for students, because it helps them to feel wow, this person actually cares about me, or this teacher actually cares about my learning and my well-being. And I think it's so important to practice I guess, and I think Antonia Dardera might have talked about this, and Paulo Freire too, this pedagogy of love, right? And I know it might be hard to practice those things, because I think a lot of us might be scared to be vulnerable, because you do have to be vulnerable in practicing this love, right? But it is important, it's important for us to be willing to open our hearts up, right? And while we're opening our hearts up, to be willing to be challenged as well along the way, either that be teachers being challenged by their students, or allowing that to happen, right? Because we also don't want teachers to, I guess what I'm trying to get at is that, teachers should also be willing to be learners themselves. And I think it's so unfortunate. I've seen this a lot in different spaces, in higher ed, in the high school setting, like in so many different educational settings, where there's teachers who think that they know everything, right? They think that once they're teachers, they don't have to learn anything else. They don't have anything else to learn from their students or from their experiences teaching. But it's in reality, great teachers are those who embrace being learners, and who are open to learning from their students, who are open to hearing their students' feedback about the class, and change their syllabus based on what students say. And I guess in talking about this, I'm thinking about my professor this semester, Professor Draz, who she was so willing and quick to like delete one of our assignments in our class. And I think that's like so fucking amazing. And we need professors who are willing to do those things, right? To be flexible with students. And instead of like kind of like what you were saying, Dr. Che, like instead of like trying to follow this like formulaic way of teaching, it's like, why not be flexible, or why not be creative along the way? And one last thing I'll say, because I don't want to take up too much space, but I think talking about these like morals of love, especially, I'm thinking back about our earlier conversation about activism, and I'm thinking about somebody I interviewed for this qualitative study I'm working on for one of my graduate classes. And they said something about they see activism as simply just love, right? And I think that's something that has like stuck with me for a while. And I think it's so beautiful to see activism as simply like as an act of love, right? As a practice of lifelong committed love for like your communities, for your people, for yourself even along the way too. But yeah, that's all I'll say now. But yeah, thank you, Dr. Che, again, for everything you shared right now.
Can I be heard? Can I be heard? Okay, great.
Of course.
I want to make sure that I am not contradicting what you're saying, Diana, or bursting your bubble, or, you know, I don't know what people say these days, you know, spitting in your Cheerios. But I want to give a slightly different perspective. Yes, I think that we need to be flexible and even accommodating. But I want to go back to what I had said earlier. There is love, Hearts and Flowers, Hallmark, Lifetime Movie of the Week kind of love. And then there is Hesed, durable, long-lasting, muscular love. Diana, if I want to get you to Escondido, there are going to be times when I'm going to say no to you. There are going to be times when I'm going to ask you to do things you don't want to do in ways you don't want to do it, because my North Star is getting you to Escondido. And so one of the things, the onus is on, I believe the onus is on the teacher, the mentor, the counselor, to be as accommodating as possible. But what you can wind up with is what I was consulting about in Dallas with a therapist who was supervising an MFT intern who is not meeting those requirements, because in the program that she had at TCU, they didn't ask a lot of her, and it showed, and she is not going to meet those requirements because of it. And so now Nicole has to get her across to use the San Diego term, has to get her from the 5, go across the 78, and get her back on the 15 so that she can get to Escondido. Her professors did her no favors. Her professors did her no favors. So there is a way, there is a sweet spot between understanding limitations, understanding challenges, but also getting you to Escondido so that you can subvert and become revolutionary. I still have a body of knowledge that I need to teach you to meet requirements that I may or may not feel are valid. And I'll show my hand and tell you, Diana, I think they're bullshit. You still need to learn them. And you don't get a lot of time to learn them. And so sometimes that is going to mean telling you no. And sometimes that is going to mean, and also when I throw you out into the, I'm looking at my picture window right now, when I throw you out into the real world, guess what? Your employer is not going to be nearly as accommodating as you want, as you are hoping that your professor will be. And I do not want you, because who you are at the beginning of a given career can sometimes stay with you. So I have a dual role for you, to love you like crazy and to love you into enough growth so that you can fly on your own. Am I making sense?
Yeah, no, I love all that you're saying. And I think I'm like typing in the chat, but yeah, I'm thinking a lot about like that balance between rigor and love, you know, like having, like practicing that love with like your students or clients, but also making sure that it's like, I don't know, I guess like when I think of rigor, I just think of like kind of like what Professor Holkenbrink was talking about like problem posing education and like practicing those things. And I also think of like challenging like helping students to think critically about their world and to like explore these different issues and question like what they know. And it's just, I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's just unfortunate that I guess like there's just a lot of teachers who don't even bother doing that, or like a lot of teachers that I've seen throughout my life, like working in education, being a student, etc., who will define rigor as like something that's not actually rigor, like assigning more work, right? Or like
it's rigidity. It's rigidity and authoritarianism.
Yeah, so
that's not what I'm talking about. That's not what I'm talking about. But I need to be
sure.
able, but that does mean that I am authoritative. I do know more than you. If I am in that mentor role, if I'm in that advisor role, I need to hopefully get you to trust that I have your best interest at heart. And I also, again, I come from different disciplines. I come from faith-based work and from counseling. But again, one of my favorite therapists, Peter Kramer, talks about the unreliable narrator. And sometimes we're unreliable narrators of our own lives. As I have, believe me, I have about 5 people that I consider mentors on a spiritual, professional, and ethical level. I teach applied relational ethics, so you better believe I have ethicists all up in my Kool-Aid all the time. And they tell me things I don't want to hear. And sometimes they tell me a flat out no. And as a 57-year-old woman with almost 40 years of activism under my belt, you'd think I know it all. I don't. I don't. I need to place myself, it's a flat and round structure, but they know more than I do. And I need to put myself under that and imitate them. I cannot imitate them if they give me a recipe and I say, no, I don't want walnuts, I want pecans. No, I'm not really a fan of chocolate chips, I want lemon. And the next thing you know, I'm not making a chocolate chip cookie and I'm not making a lemon bar. I'm making nothing. I want you to make the best chocolate chip cookie you can make. And then later on, when you decide you want a lemon bar, you can do it without a recipe. But the recipe sometimes has to hold. And since I don't have an infinite amount of time to give you all that I need to, I am doing you a disservice by not steering you back to the chocolate chip recipe on the way to Escondido. I'm going to mix up all these metaphors. But do you see what I'm trying to say?
Can I say something too? I don't know. I can't see everybody's faces.
I can see you.
Okay, so yeah, so kind of going off of what Lace was saying, right? It's like because for me, where I predominantly sit right now is in middle and high school, and for me, right, those expectations and that rigor is important, but I don't look at it as just a bunch of busy work, just a bunch of things, ways to kind of sort them, right? The way I look at it is a matter of like structure, because they need to be able to know what to expect from me as well. Just like I expect things from them, they need to be able to know what they can expect from me, and that I'm a reliable person, that I'm somebody that they can go to, because a lot of these students had been pushed through the system, and I was making sure that I met them where they were, and I was holding them to standards that they could realistically meet without making sure that I diminished that rigor simply because they wanted to hold hands and be walked through everything. Meanwhile, I was there to set the expectations of that they can make sure they can rely on me consistently for the same thing each time. And I can tell you that I am extremely close with my students, though, and they know that they can come to me because I am that person and I've set those expectations, right? And so being able to explain that and do that is a part of that rigor, but it's also a part of my deep love for both teaching and my students, right? I do that all the time because I want them to be able to trust me and know that they can rely on the same response from me, regardless of what the circumstance is. And then Leigh said she wants to piggyback off of that.
You said a lot of what I wanted to say, but I just wanted to say a little bit more about what that love looks like and what it doesn't, and how white students get this hesed, no nonsense, muscular love, along with the esteem, along with the cherishing. What we get is authoritarianism with no love and no cherishing. And by the way, I'm going to make it really hard on you, and I don't think you can do it anyway. And why are you even here? So part of my loving you, can I keep picking on you, Diana? Part of loving Diana is knowing that she has the capacity and the agency if she chooses to exercise it, and the volition if she chooses to exercise it, to take whatever I give her. And she sees it in my eyes. And she knows that I am on her side. In therapy parlance and in pastoral counseling parlance, it says metaphorically sitting alongside the client or the parishioner, in this case, sitting alongside the student. What Charlene was talking about, I am sitting here right next to you. I'm not going anywhere. Going back to psychology a little bit, attachment theory. Sue Johnson is one of the best practitioners of adult attachment theory out there. And she says that no matter what the dyadic or group dynamic is, there's a central question that everyone asks of each other. There's something that I'm asking of Dr. Choi right now. Will you be there for me if I need you? That is the central question of attachment theory. And a teacher, that is, if Charlene is Charlene every single day, she's giving them something that they don't get at home most of the time. Committed, consistent, congruent presence that they can believe in and lean on. That's better than any hearts and flowers. If Diana knows that she can lean on me and that I'm going to be the same person today as I was tomorrow, and that course correction is not a punishment. Course correction is not a punishment. Just like being activated or triggered is not the same as being harmed. And I'm going to show Diana that. Yeah, she might end up wanting to blow up, shut down, or run away, but while I'm also giving her instruction, I'm also teaching her tools of emotional regulation so that she can take what I have to give her with equanimity. And her boat's not going to be so rocked that she loses the instruction. But if I'm afraid, because I was looking in the chat and I was seeing courage a lot, and I'm going to be talking a lot in Lace on Race about courage because we had an incident a couple of months ago where most of my community lost their courage. 3 years of teaching them and they lost their courage. If I am fearful of Diana, if I think she's going to run away, shut down, or blow up, I'm not giving her my best. What I'm doing is trying to keep her in the car by any means necessary. And I'm pandering to her, right? And I'm giving her less than I could and expecting less of her than she can give me. And for marginalized students, people, children of color, children of trauma, no. We owe them better. We owe them rigor, loving rigor, married to unshakable congruence. That's it.
Absolutely, we do. We do owe, especially the marginalized people, more. I agree. But I do want to actually interject and say, Lace and Charlene, you are actually exceptions to the rule. The way you teach, the way Charlene teaches, are actually exceptions to what we actually get in the institution of higher learning or what we normally get in terms of schools. Because how do I know that? There are a lot of actually teachers who are nice, but who may not end up actually being good. And I'm talking about in the moral sense.
Absolutely.
Right? So I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Diana, but I don't think Diana was actually talking about a way out or doing less work. I think she was simply actually saying, hey, I need to take a breath. And the institution and most of the faculty and teachers will not allow for her to take a breath. Right? No, absolutely. Right. So I know for a fact, I know Diana, she's not someone who actually is asking for easier way out. Absolutely not.
No.
Right. She's actually saying, yeah, I actually work harder usually than anybody else because of my position in our society. That pushes me to the margins. And at times, I just need to actually have a minute off, right? So it's not contradictory. I think what Lace and Charlene are saying, right, is on point as much as what Deanna is saying is on point, right? Because I think and this is a fine line, right? because you're right. As people who are marginalized, we have to know that we have to fight twice as hard, 3 times as hard, or else it's just not going to happen. So we need to know that. But at the same time, our goal is then to fight so that we change the situation where we always have to fight 2-3 times as much, right? You know, so yes, the whole notion of, I guess, like, you know, we were saying, and like Charlene was saying earlier today, right? Problem posing. Yes, I think we also have to figure out how do I get myself out of poverty, right? That's one thing. But the real question becomes not how do I get myself out? That's problem solving, right? Problem posing is problematizing capitalism or problematizing wealth, right? So while I should figure out any other strategies so that I could still eat today, right? That shouldn't be the focus, the end focus. The problematization should be, right? Wealth or capitalism that creates immense poverty consistently, right? So yes, I think, yeah, it's not that we're doing this or that, you know, we're saying that it can't be done any other way. But I think all of those things could all be true at the same time. Yep, I agree with Diana. Sometimes we need time off. Because sometimes, you know what, I don't even know why or how faculty members came up with the assignments that they did. I have no idea. And I'm saying that as a faculty. Sometimes when I sit there, I say, yeah, maybe 3 assignments this semester. I have no real reason why. It could be 7 or it could be 1, right? So then the idea is, yes, maybe there are times where faculty members need to reflect and say, we should get rid of 3. And I think Diana was also mentioning that within the context of, again, what I think some of you spoke about today, unprecedented times, right? This is a situation we haven't seen in over 100 years. And by the way, it's not even 100 years. I'm sure what happened back then, the Spanish flu, is different than what's going on now. So this really is unprecedented, right? So even in the face of unprecedented times, there are more faculty than not who will hold on to their rubric and their way of having built their syllabus, and they will not budge from that, right? That I think is problematic. That I think should be questioned and challenged, right? But that never, right, has anything to do with whether or not students should always, right, give their best in terms of learning. Not being schooled, but learning. I don't know. I never know. So, you know.
I totally affirm. I hear every word you're saying, and I totally affirm. I was using you as a general. It was not personalized, and I hope.
No, of course. And that's why I would say I agree with your point and Charlene's point. You folks are on point. I agree.
Alrighty.
I also think that. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Lex.
Go ahead, please. I also I agree with every single word that was said just now, and I do think that one of the ways that we can start transforming is exactly what Dr. Choi said, which is what is actually necessary. Why am I doing 7 assignments this semester instead of 3, instead of 1? What is my actual objective? There are some objectives that you have to hit, because eventually you're going to take the GRE. Eventually you're going to have to get through a counseling practicum or a teaching practicum, and I want you to win. And sometimes you only get 1 shot. But what's it in service to? Is it in service to my aggrandizement, or is it in service to the student ultimately? And even beyond that, is it in service to the wider world? I want Charlene to win so that Charlene can go on and transform. It is not so that I can have my ego boost 3 times a week for an hour. So again, it goes back to internal process and internal motivation. That's it.
All right, thank you, Lace. And Dr. Che, is there anything else you wanted to add?
No.
No? Okay.
Not really.
Alrighty, so it is 2:56, so we have 4 minutes left. As our conference is closing to an end, I want to thank everyone here for attending the conference. I know it was majority of Saturday, but hopefully you guys still get to go out at night. I want to thank all of our presenters and anyone who spoke and participated in our dialogue. Shout out to Lace and Charlene for the inspirational presentation about pedagogy of the oppressed. And shout out to Lauren, Che, Spencer, Rose, and Talia for the hard work putting into this conference. And we are very grateful for all of your participation, and we would love to have your feedback. Lauren will be sending out a link in the chat, and we just want to use these last couple minutes to fill that out so we can get to see if you like the conference, what would you like differently done, and just your feedback mainly. So if you have any questions, please ask away. But once again, thank you everyone for being here today, and that is it for our conference.
Abby,
Oh yes, Dr.
we have, I think Charlene wanted to make an announcement.
Oh, go ahead, Charlene.
Oh yeah. Thank you. I completely spaced it. I just want to let you know that the DLP is going to be taking off and doing some more things this summer. Specifically, we have a food pantry that we have been in the process of kind of building. Specifically, you can't see her photo, but Rihanna has been my right hand with that, collecting a ton of food to start putting into that, and I'm going to get us storage unit to fill. But basically I need folks to help me collect more food and start thinking about ways to distribute and just come up with some of the awesome, unique ways that that we could kind of pursue this in a safe way, but still also, helping work with the community for various things. So if anybody is interested in helping with that, that's great. I do have some other things that could be useful that we could tailor as well to your interest in terms of internships, if you are interested in that. And I will also like to pass it quickly to Lace, because she's also looking for an intern. I just wanted to see if she wanted to share just really briefly what that is about.
I absolutely do. We are looking for an intern here in San Diego, possibly 2. Liaison Race, like I said, is an exclusively online community, and my staff, the 2 that you just saw, one was in Colorado and the other one was in Northern California. I do not have any San Diego people here. So I'm looking for an intern that could act as both my assistant and as a community director, and would actually have that title. Because we are pleased enough and fortunate enough to be the largesse and the beneficiaries of Dignified Learning Project as a fiscal sponsor. We're a formal entity. We are, right now, the IRS is getting us our 501c3 status, but we can offer, or will be able to offer, college credit. And we are also working on building a reserve so that we will be able to pay a small but real stipend to an intern here in the San Diego area. We can talk about duties and we can talk about hours, but it would be a 6-month to a year commitment. So 6 months, and then with us mutually agreeing, we can re-up, as they say. But basically what you would be learning in those 6 months is basically how to keep my train running on time, and also the ethos and the mission and the method of Lace on Race, how we do what we do and who we are while we do it. That is going to be as much as of your process as doing the nuts and bolts of administrative and programmatic work. And so I would, there are quite a few people who I have seen today that I would love to have coffee with. So if you are in any way interested, hit up Charlene or hit me up in messaging either on Lace on Race Facebook page or laceonrace.com. I'd love to talk to you.
Thank you, Lace. I think, Che, you look like you want to say something.
No, I don't.
Okay.
I'm just so happy about how the conference went, and I just learned so much from everyone. I'm just happy.
Yes. You look very happy. But yes, thank you, everyone. And have a good night or a good day, depending on where you are located. But yeah, that is it for today. Thank you, everyone.